Warmer from the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in segment number 2 by one of our good friends, Nate Hornong. You know him a little bit better as Shaggy Bets over at Your Betting News, and he also does the show Up Your Units. He is going to be joining me, and we're going to talk about what we've seen here in the first week and a half or so of the season, the high-scoring games that we've seen, and the amount of unders that we've seen with bookmakers reacting to the very high totals that we have been seeing, and a few teams that he's feeling a little bit bullish/bearish on. We'll preview some games for Friday, and then in the final segment, going to get you guys picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this College Basketball Friday as we hit some bank shots. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larry ZM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by Better, BETR. On Better, they're making it easier than ever before to get into the game and get into some daily fantasy, because just by listening to this podcast and going to better.app, that is BETR.app, and typing in VSINPOD, VSINPOD, you get $10 free. All you need to do is take a look, take the players that you want to go over or under their stat category, and boom, you're all good to go. And we're all good to go to take a look back at what was a small slate in college basketball on Thursday, but a fun one. Let's recap it, try to find some trends, and try to get to know these teams a little bit better.
Games from yesterday is Greg buzzing about. Here is the rowdy recap.
We had one big ranked matchup between Purdue and Alabama, and Purdue goes on the road and they get the job done against Alabama 87-80, and Alabama shot relatively solid from 3-point range, 16 out of 44, but the difference was Purdue was able to win the battle on the glass 52-28, and that's where Oscar Clough comes into play as he gave the team 11 rebounds, did a nice job there, and then Braden Smith, he did a bit of everything. 29 points on 5 of 10 3-point shooting, 7 boards, 4 assists for Purdue. They did a nice job taking care of the ball. They were able to do a solid job with only 10 turnovers. Now, Alabama only turns the ball over 6 times, but LeBaron Filan, you just needed a little bit more out of him. He's a guy that they paid a lot of money to in the offseason. He did have 7 assists and 4 rebounds to go along with 11 points, but just 5 of 14 from the floor, had 4 turnovers, and for Purdue, they find a way to persevere in the big game. And in the other action that we saw in the backyard brawl, it was all West Virginia. They have now played every one of their first 4 games to the under, 71-49 the final. Pittsburgh, they go just 5 of 20 from 3-point range. They lose that turnover battle by a count of 12-6. As for West Virginia, another very nice performance here for Harlan Obiana. He was able to supply the team with 19 points, 6 boards down low. Brenton Lorient has really been the top scorer for them. He only gave the team 6 points in this game, but you had DJ Turn It Up Thomas go 2 of 5 from 3-point range off the bench. And for Pittsburgh, you did have 12 points in this one out of Cam Corrin. He had a double-double, 12 points, 10 rebounds, but a backcourt that is very much new look from a season ago. They just looked completely out of sorts, so that was a little bit brutal for them. For Seton Hall, they do find a way to power their way past Monmouth, 70-58 the final. Some big-time spread controversy here, as you were seeing this game opening up right around about 12.5, 13 on the spread. Flows more around about 14.5, 15.5 on the spread. So if you took the points with Monmouth, you did find a way to be able to get there. As for Seton Hall, their 3-point shooting last year was rough. Looks like it's going to be once again this year, 7-22 from 3-point range. They were able to get 14 points off the bench out of Tawan Simpkins, who comes over from Elon. And for Monmouth, they did lose the rebound battle in this one by a count of 37-36, but relatively lively there. Big thing was they lost the turnover battle 20-8. So, and something that our good friends Hawks are going to need to clean up, and this was very clean for LSU. They weren't able to get the cover on north of 20 points, but they do get a nice win, 98-81 over Florida National. Florida National, they allow LSU to just be able to win the battle on the glass, 43-33, as Markel Sutton, who comes on over from Omaha, has looked very solid this far. 19 points, 12 rebounds. This LSU team was able to go as well 30 of 34 at the free throw line, as you've got a Florida National team that tries to generate turnovers, and they did generate 14 turnovers in this game, but they also got called for 100 billion fouls. As for Florida National, helping them get the cover, Julian Mackey off the bench, 24 points, Corey Stevenson with 25, and nobody else scored in double figures. So for Florida National, it was pretty much a 2-man band out there. And when it comes to this one, for Loyola Chicago, the struggles just continue. 95-74, Wichita State lays it on the Ramblers, as For Loyola Chicago, they actually go 11 of 25 from 3. DeWilk Tavares was coming off the bench to begin the season, 16 points, 5 of 9 3-point shooting, but that defense was wretched. For Wichita State, they were 339th in the country at 3-point shooting percentage last year. 16 out of 32 from 3 with Michael Gray. Well, you had Loyola Chicago not quite seeing 50 shades of gray, more like 17 because he scored 17 points in this game. Keenan Giles, 7 of 8 from 3-point range. Will Berg helped them win the rebound battle, 37-35. He comes in for Purdue, 13 points, 10 rebounds, complete another domination by our good friends over there at Wichita State. You saw Alabama A&M be able to squeak out a close one against Charleston Southern, 68-64. That totals well north of 150. That goes under. Louisiana Monroe versus Houston Christian game goes under, 72-61. Houston Christian, they find a way to be able to get the win and cover, but we're noticing more and more unders. Southern Miss versus Grambling, with Grambling getting that win 75-70. That was the game that went under. And for Columbia, they were down at the half against UMass Lowell. Lowell closes as a 13-13.5 point underdog, and they don't cover. 86-72 the final. I feel like we've seen more of these in this season rather than in past years, where you have the underdog, they're up at the half, you're catching a good amount of points, and then they just let go of their open. For UMass Lowell, they went 7 of 13 from 3-point range, but they lose this game because they just were unable to win the battle on the glass. They lost this battle 48-25 as you had Mason and Ryder be able to fight for Columbia, 14 points, 9 rebounds. Kenny Nolan, 24 points. And if you had UMass Lowell in the points in this one, man, that is all sorts of brutal. They actually had a north of 50% win percentage to begin the second half. And then, yeah, things went very, very southward from there. As for Columbia, they were actually only up by a count of 75-68 with 4 minutes remaining. So they had to pull away late, and they were very much able to do so. So kudos to them. And then we have to give a little bit of kudos to the fact that you saw this team be able to go out there, get the job done. As for St. Thomas, they lay it on UW Green Bay, 80-61 the final. The Fighting Dugout Believes do not have a lot of fight right now. They went 5 of 20 from 3-point range. Why UW Green Bay employs a radio show host as their coach, I have no idea. As someone from the great state of Wisconsin, honestly, it quite makes me angry. I would like to use more choice words, but that said, it is what it is, and the UW Green Bay Fighting Phoenix will continue to not fight until they make that change. But that said, with Nolan Minsale, he was able to spy the team with 20 points, and St. Thomas, you were able to bet on them in this game to be able to cover. I did so myself, and that was nice and glorious. And for Kansas State, this was glorious as well. I'm doing this as the game is just wrapping up. We've got about 4 minutes remaining. Do have to have this podcast up by midnight Pacific, 3 o'clock a.m. Eastern. That's why we always have to pre-record these recaps, but that's currently up 92-79 against Cal. I took the under in this game, and apparently Kansas State just didn't want to miss. As I'm recording this, they're shooting 65.5% from floor, 9-16 from 3. With 3 minutes and change remaining, you've had PJ Hegarty supply 22 points, Nate Johnson with 20 points, and off the bench, David Castillo, 16 points. And for Cal, they themselves have shot 12 of 24 from 3-point range. Jada Ames has won 5 of 6 from 3-point range, but you also have this Cal team right now not doing the best job of taking care of the ball right now with 16 turnovers. Kansas State, they themselves 16 turnovers, but that said, for Cal, also only 19 total rebounds in this game because neither of these teams want to miss. But with regards to what we're seeing trend-wise in college basketball, we are now starting to see some unders being able to come through. As I ended up start the season, it was just all about the overs, and things were getting harebrained, things were getting very crazy, to say the least. But if you're looking trend-wise in college basketball, we have now seen a near 50-50 split to overs and unders. 227 overs to 226 unders. Meanwhile, the favorites, they are still killing it against the spread. 237, 214, and 5 against the spread. So they're in at nearly a 52.5% clip. But you take a look at what has happened over the last few days. We've seen a nice reversal there in terms of everything that we saw on Thursday. In terms of the games that actually went final, right now we're seeing 4 overs, 6 unders, and I believe we've got 1 or 2 pushes along the way. And the favorites, they started out the night 2-7 against the spread. You're going to be able to get there, it looks like, with Kansas State, and you did have a few other teams late be able to get there. Alabama, A&M, it all depended upon where they closed against the spread, but now you're starting to see some of these underdogs be able to come through. Florida National was one of them, so that'll be another one for the underdogs, and we are starting to see the dogs and the unders start to be able to restore some order, and we always have order on this podcast because we always have great guests, like our good friend in Shaggy Bets. You know him from the show Up Your Units. He does great work over at Your Betting News. His real name is Nate Hornong, but we're going to call him Shaggy Bets because that's always a lot of fun. If you take a look at his Twitter/X profile, he's wearing a shirt like he's Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. I was a Scooby-Doo fan back in the day, so that makes me smile, and it makes me smile that he's going to be on the podcast next, right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Decent Family Podcast. Are you looking to get an inside edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSIN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by this man, as you may know him a little bit better as Shaggy Bets, Nate Hornong. He does a tremendous job over at Your Betting News. He's on the show. He does a tremendous job looking at this great game of college basketball. I know that he does a great job just across the board with regards to college sports. He, much like myself, a non-Division I guy as well. If I'm not mistaken, he's Division II, I'm Division III, so that always works out very well. He, much like myself, has roots out there in the Midwest as well, and you're able to follow Nate on the old Twitter/X at Shaggy Bets, and that is Shaggy_Bets with 2 G's on Shaggy. And Nate, it's always great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Hey, appreciate you having me on, Greg. Thanks for doing this. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I am excited to have you aboard as well, and I love that on the old Twitter/X you call yourself Kobe's handler, because that is a man that probably needs to be kept in control after DePaul lost a few days ago at home to Buffalo. That was not great. And just what have you made out of the first week and a half or so of the season? Because last few days we've really been seeing the unders come through, but the reason why we're seeing the unders come through is that bookmakers have had to make a very, very dramatic, shall we say, shift on these totals and really jack them up after what we saw the first few days of the season.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, it's still early on. So us and the bookmakers, we're all trying to figure out how fast these teams play, what they like to do offensively. Obviously, we see with the IU Indy Jaguars, those totals just get bought up to oblivion and still end up going over with the speed at which they play. So it's been an exciting season so far. You got to give a shout out to the freshman class. There's just phenomenal players across the board in this freshman class making a statement early. So it's a great hoop season so far. Looking forward to it all in the long haul.
Yep, absolutely, and it has been a lot of fun to be taking a look at that. And has that been one of the biggest shifts for you this season? Because I found the last few seasons, I didn't really have to take into account the freshmen too much. Obviously, you were taking into account like a guy like Cooper Flagg last year because Cooper Flagg is Cooper Flagg. But I feel like with a lot of these guys without the COVID year anymore, unless if you're like Chad Baker-Mazar, who it feels like he's a Van Wilder of college basketball, a lot of these guys have now moved on. And because of that, you pretty much lost 2 classes of guys at the same time, which I think put freshmen at a little bit more of a premium this season.
Oh, no doubt about it. Talent level across the board as well. I mean, you've got Caleb Wilson out in North Carolina making a statement in a blue-blooded game against Kansas. Michael Brown put himself on the map with nearly 30 points against Kentucky just a couple nights ago. So, yeah, there's a lot of freshmen all over this country making statements early. You know, even Cameron Boozer talking about the Wooden Award, Darren Peterson as well, kind of in that early preseason running for that Player of the Year award. So it's going to be great to follow these guys. Yes, a lot of them are going to be one and dones and go to the league immediately, but we got to enjoy them while we got them here in the NCAA.
Yes, absolutely. And I do think that it's going to be a lot of fun to take a look at that. And then a guy with a great last name, Darren Peterson, over there at Kansas. Always a little bit of a stand for that, as we do have Nate Hornong. You know him better as Shaggy Bets. He's joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And certainly the freshmen have been a little bit of a standout as well. And how about you just take a look at the fact that I feel like 3-point rates, that's merely the percentage of shots that you take from 3-point range. It just feels like it's higher than ever before as well. And I feel like there's a lot of teams that have been investing in, shall we say, the the air quotes of positionless basketball with a team like an Iona really kicking it up. We've seen them play some high totals, and some of these teams have been traditionally very slow. Like Kent State has always been a defense-oriented team. It's been a little bit shocking to see a program like that have a little bit of a different identity this year.
Well, no doubt about it. And, that's kind of just the game of basketball evolving ever since obviously Steph Curry did his thing in the NBA. The three-pointer, it's the move around town. And teams are adapting. You see these teams shoot, nearly half of their shots, if not over for 50% of them from beyond the arc. And we see these teams just run up and down the floor, turning these games into a track meet, just like Alabama and St. John's did in their battle in Madison Square Garden last Saturday. We saw, a ton of points. Alabama, I think, nearly 33-point attempts in that game. It's just the way these teams kind of have to keep up with the game of basketball evolving. And, there's these high totals that us bettors love to watch because it's exciting. And that's, makes some room for the underbettors as well. So it's exciting just watching the game of basketball evolve.
Yes, it certainly is, and it has been incredible to watch. And have there been a few teams that have really been standing out to you in terms of either a change in style or just the way that they've been operating in general? Because we talked about IU, and I think that that's the biggest outlier of all. I've never seen a style like that where Ben Howlett, you're a Division II guy. You remember him. His West Liberty team was averaging over 100 points per game last season. You wondered if he would stay tried and true to that style. Well, he has doubled down on that style, so he certainly has been able to do that. But have there been a few other teams that have just really stood out to you, and maybe you've had to make a little bit of adjustments with the way that they've been playing this year?
I got to tip my cap and give all the flowers possible to the Indiana Hoosiers. They have definitely been wowing me early in the season. 3-0 straight up, 3-0 against the spread, an over bettor's dream, averaging nearly 99.7 points per game. They've got 5 double-digit scorers already this season, shooting over 50% from the field as a team, 47% from deep. Transfers Lamar Wilkerson and Tatum Connerway, just a phenomenal backcourt for the Hoosiers. Connor Enright, kind of the glue guy there as well. And then Sam Alexis putting in great minutes coming over as well. Darren DeVries has just got himself a transfer all-star class kind of these mid-major guys now playing some Big Ten basketball, not to mention his own son, Tucker DeVries, who's a star in himself, went off against Marquette. So I'm very, very excited to watch this Indiana Hoosiers team. They value the basketball, less than 9 turnovers per game while forcing 7 steals as well. So I'm very excited to see what Indiana does in the Big Ten this season.
Yes, I am as well. And just how much have you taken a look at the Big Ten thus far this season and perhaps been a little bit impressed? Because I do feel like up and down the board, the Big Ten has had a nice start to the season. We've seen Wisconsin look relatively impressive. I know that they lost to Missouri, but Minnesota looks like a very improved team as well. And it just feels like a conference that's going to have a lot of depth. And really, the lone team has really been disappointing up from an against the spread standpoint thus far has been UCLA, who's had a few close calls that you may not want to see. But past that, I feel like they've actually overachieved a little bit thus far.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you've got 6 teams already ranked in the top 10. I am very, very high on this Illinois Fighting Illini team. This season, I've actually got stake in them to cut down the final nets in Indy at 40-1. Took that preseason, but I like the team that Brad Underwood has assembled. I know they are dealing with injuries early, but a big gutsy win at home against a very, very good Texas Tech team, even with JT Toppin going for, I believe, 35 points. The Illini were able to squeak out a win, covered the -3.5 as well. So the Big Ten top to bottom, yeah, they're going to be stacked. They're going to have some sleepers as well, like the Hoosiers, like I mentioned, the Oregon Ducks. I mean, a team that's kind of started slower as well, and now kind of picking up their speed. So yeah, I think the Big Ten is just going to be a phenomenal basketball conference this year, once again.
Oh, I am right there with you. And we are going to be seeing some Big Ten teams that are going to be in action on Friday. And I do think that some of these spreads are very interesting. Like I look at Iowa being a 14.5 to a 15.5 point favorite over Xavier right now. And this is a Xavier team that's fallen on some tough times. When you lose at home by double figures to Santa Clara, certainly not the worst team in the world. But if you're Xavier, you don't want to be losing and getting blown off your home floor by Santa Clara. What do you make out of a game like this where now that spread is up north of 2 touchdowns? And I do think that this could start to be buy low season on some of these teams like Xavier that has underachieved thus far.
Oh, yeah, talk about underachieving. I mean, squeaking out wins against Marist and Lemoyne, getting blown out by Santa Clara. I think that spread's probably a bit of an overreaction, to be quite honest with you. Iowa, I don't think they play fast enough to cover the 14.5 points. Ben McCollum coming over from Drake, where him and Bennett Sturts were one of the slowest teams in the nation. Sure, they're having no trouble scoring so far this season, but it's because they're playing Robert Morris, Western Illinois, against a team like Xavier, their first game against a team that, has a pulse. I don't know if Iowa is going to be able to cover that big number just because of their style of basketball. I'm sure they're able to win it on their home floor, but covering 14, no thank you there. I don't want any piece of that from the Hawkeyes.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Like I said, my spread personally at a 12.5 in this game. Iowa should be a favorite and even a double figure favorite. But once you get north of 2 touchdowns, that for me was a little bit of a point of no return. Then sticking out there in the Big Ten, this is going to be an interesting matchup as Michigan got a little bit more of a test than expected against Wake Forest. Looked like they were going to run and hide in that game. That game goes overtime. Now they go on the road against TCU as 7.5 point favorites. What do you make out of this with a TCU team that they might have the moniker of worst loss of the season thus far? Well, Boise State lost to a team in a strip mall, so that's the worst loss of the season, but certainly top 5, losing at home to the New Orleans Privateers to begin this season. So I want to get your thoughts here on a TCU team that has been very downtrodden and Michigan getting a little bit of an unexpected test in terms of their previous game against Wake Forest.
Could not have seen that coming from the Demon Deacons when they went into Ann Arbor and gave the Wolverines a run for their money, but I think Dusty May is going to use that kind of as a wake-up call. They are on the road here against another Power 4, Power 6 opponent, whatever you want to phrase it in college basketball. But I think he's going to have his guys focused. Michigan is a very, very talented team. Obviously, maybe it's taken a little bit for those transfers to gel early on. That can't happen, what happened against Wake Forest. So I think May is going to get his guys focused, get them ready to go on the road and demolish this Horned Frogs team, who I'm really not impressed with. Obviously, that loss, a big stain on their resume. Sure, they've turned it around thus far handling business, but against your toughest opponent yet to date, a top 6 team in the country, I don't know if TCU is going to be able to cover that number at home. I would probably take the Wolverines by 7.5.
And it's going to be a lot of intrigue to see what we do get out of Michigan moving forward as well, because everyone thought that Yaxel Lindenborg was going to be the main guy. Dave Mara really stepped up big in that Wake Forest game as well. So they're going to be a fun team to watch, as we do have Nate Hornong, better known as Shaggy Best, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops and up and down the boulevard. We do have a lot of fun games, but perhaps the game of the night is going to be happening out there in the great state of California. UCLA and Arizona, a classic Pac-12 matchup. I was talking about it. UCLA has had a little bit of struggle. Arizona, as we know, perhaps one of the biggest wins of the season, knocking off Florida, night number 1. And Arizona right now 2.5 to a 3-point favorite. What do you make out of this one with the UCLA team has been a little bit wobbly, and for Arizona, ever since that win against Florida, the defense has actually looked very good.
My whole issue with Arizona is can you play defense? They couldn't really slow down Florida. They're a team that loves to run, loves to score, loves to dare the other team to keep up with them. And that's exactly what I expect them to do in this game against UCLA. UCLA, a team that plays really, really slow. Very, very tough defensively, very sound, but offensively, I mean, it's just a snail's pace with this team. Obviously, bringing in Donovan Dent has definitely boosted their offense a little bit more, but I'm not sure that they can keep up with Arizona. They are going to seriously need to slow this game down in order to keep the Arizona Wildcats from scoring 80, 90, 100 points, which I don't necessarily think UCLA is capable of doing. So I like Arizona. We've seen 75 possessions per game so far this season for this Wildcats team. I think they're going to really run it up, turn it into a track meet, and dare Mick Cronin's team to keep up offensively, which I don't see them doing. So I like the Wildcats to keep cruising in this game.
Well, I mentioned it at the top that you are Kobe's keeper, and we have to give our ode to Kobe Marshall on this one because we've got DePaul and Northwestern, a classic battle of Illinois schools, and well, it was not great for DePaul in their last game. When you get down 20 points in the first half against Buffalo, you're going the wrong way down a one-way street. Northwestern completely clobbered Cleveland State by over 40 points in their previous matchup, and Northwestern's a road team here. It's within the city, so not a lot of travel, but 6.5 to 7 points is this one, total of 138. How do you take a look at this game with the Northwestern team that I think that it's fair to say not a ton was expected of them, and so far so good. And for DePaul, it looked like they were getting back to promise, and then they get blown out by Buffalo.
Yeah, not the great start.
Not great.
Blue Demons. I'm sure I'm going to hear plenty about it from Colby about this game, but DePaul's not a team that I trust at all, especially after what happened the other night. Northwestern, you said it, no real expectations for this Wildcats team coming into the season, but certainly overperforming them with some big wins already this season. So my gut would say take the Wildcats here. Not really a road game, like you said. It's the Battle of Chicago. I got to side with Northwestern on this one.
Yeah, I do not blame you there. I think that it's getting to be a little bit of a point of no return, but man, that 12 team looked grody a few nights ago. So that's not good to say the least. And is there anything else that's really standing out to you for Friday? Because we've got a smattering of some big time games. Like I feel like the game of the night we touched upon was Arizona versus UCLA. Mm-hmm. That's going to be rock solid. We've got some toilet bowl matchups as well, but you're able to make just as much money on the toilet bowl matchups as you are the big matchups. So that's something that always warms my heart. But anything else that's really standing out to you?
Taking you to Fayetteville, Arkansas, Coach Cal and the boys. I like the over in Samford and Arkansas. I actually booked 161. Think it might go up closer to tip-off, but Arkansas is a team that loves to run, top 75 in pace. Samford just as fast, 88th. I have them in pace. So we just saw 68 possessions when Arkansas went to East Lansing to take on Sparty, but Michigan State's a team that likes to slow things down. Those 2 games at home for Arkansas against very, very weaker opponents, we saw 81 and 74 possessions. So I think this is going to turn into just a bunch of back and forth. I like Arkansas to, win this one handedly. Do they cover the 25.5? I'm not totally sure, but I definitely think there's going to be plenty of points. Samford, a team that gets to the free throw line a ton, 37 and 44 free throw attempts in their last 2 games. So I think we're going to get plenty of points with the clock stopped and get some whistles to help us get over this number. So Samford and Arkansas over the 161 for me on Friday night.
Hey, I'm right there with you. I'm going to be taking a look at that over as well. I felt like the total should have been closer to a 165 and a half. So we are in agreement there. And I know you, Nate, are doing a tremendous job taking a look at this sport of college basketball. You're dialed in for what is going to be a tremendous season. We'll have the good people at home know it's all on tap for you. And how people are able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yep, absolutely. You can follow me on all socials at Shaggy_bets. Posting my daily card here on X and Twitter. You can find me every single day live on Up Your Units, my podcast I do with Colby Marcio over at the Betting News Network, live every Monday through Friday at noon Eastern, talking all things about our daily bets, college basketball, college football, the works over there. So appreciate you having me on, Greg. Thank you very much.
It is always great to be able to get Nate aboard. He's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to college basketball. He covers it all, the big teams, the small teams, the middle-sized teams, and every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. So a big thanks to Nate for joining me on Cuss Cuss Hoops, now part of the VC Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Friday as we hit some bank shots. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Cuss Cuss Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by our good friend Nate Hornong. You know him better as Shaggy Bets. He, every single time he joins me, lends such great insights. I know that he's over there at Your Betting News doing a little bit of everything and doing so all so well. So big thanks to Nate for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Friday as we hit some bank shots.
Most financial establishments close at a certain time, but not here. It is time for a side and total on every game on today's betting board bank shots.
Do note that as per usual, any changes that are made to these plays will be listed up on my Twitter/X feed at gunit_81, and we're going to be going in Las Vegas station order. This is where we go with the games in the bigger conferences first, and then the games involving teams from these conferences, and it doesn't need to be both teams, it only needs to be one team. They are going to be listed at the bottom. That would be the MEAC, the Big South, the SWAC, the America East, the Atlantic Sun, the Southland, the Northeast Conference, the Patriot League. I think that we've got them all, so how about if we do get things started with this first game, which, as I'm doing this, is off the board in a lot of places. 8:33, 8:34 on the card. Eastern Michigan plays this to IU Indy. I think the reason why this is off the board is they tried to open up a total of 171.5, and right now the one book that I'm seeing that has this up, have it back up to a 185.5. Eastern Michigan currently being an 8-point favorite, and I'm going to be willing to take the points with IU Indy. I did set them as a 6.5-point dog, and I set my total at 194.5. Keep in mind with IU Indy, they're not a team that has played necessarily the most up-tempo teams. Like Ohio State might be a little bit of a higher octane offense this year, but like Long Island last year was well outside the top 275 in terms of total possessions per game. Butler last year was a pretty mid-tempo team, and yet in every one of those games they got well past 80 and they exceeded 80 in terms of the amount of points that they gave up. They were able to hold the non-D1 team that they played to less than 80, but I mean, this is a team that is going to be playing super duper up-tempo, and they are playing one of the most ridiculous styles that you've ever seen. They are pressing from 94 feet away, so they're gambling for turnovers, like in their games, and this includes their game against a non-D1 team. They generate 23 turnovers per game, but they're turning the ball over 16 times per game themselves. They only shoot 29% from 3, but they take 34 threes per game, and they take over 80 field goal attempts per game. Like, it's absolutely wild what we've seen, and it's this Coach Ben Howlett system. He comes on over from West Liberty, where his team was averaging 100-plus points per contest last year, and he's brought with him these guys that were so good at the non-Division I level. Your top two scorers, Kyler DiAgostino, a couple with Matt Compass. These were guys last year at the non-D1 ranks. Your main guy that has Division I experience, Jackson Edwards, he was actually pretty rock solid a few years ago. If you look at his numbers at Valparaiso, was a part-time starter for them, 7.5 points per contest, 6'6", a little bit of a do-it-all guy, but you need guys that are in very, very good shape to be able to run this system. And on the other end, you've got an Eastern Michigan team that they do lose their top three scorers and their top three players with regards to assists per game from a season ago, which is why I do think that they're going to have a little bit of trouble with this system, and that's why I think that you're going to get a little bit of a turnover fest. Stan Heath, he's been trying to be able to replace these guys with a little bit more size. Mohamed Habab, hopefully I said that correct, he has been able to give the team 23 rebounds in the first 2 games this season. Comes on over after he began his career over at Central Michigan, but really couldn't get out there on the floor for them. We've got Mac Seal, who comes over after he was at Detroit last year, a double-figure scorer, but was very limited, was unable to get out there on the floor too much due to injury, so we shall see what he's going to be able to do moving forward. But they did bring in compound transfers from Northwestern St. John Sanders, who was a nice double-figure scorer, was able to shoot in the high 30s from 3, and then Addison Patterson, a top 100 recruit from many years ago over at Nevada and Oregon, where last year over at Northwestern State, like 13 points, 6 boards, a block, a steal, does a little bit of everything. Not necessarily a great three-point shooter. Aiden Rubio is someone that they're going to be looking to for that three-point shooting, and I do think that with this Eastern Michigan team not really having a point guard right now against a IU Indy team that they force all this pressure, I do think that's going to cause for a lot of turnovers, a scramble game, and a very high-scoring game. So I total 194.5. Anything of a 194 or less, I like the over, and at 7+ take the points with IU Indy. 835, 836 on the card. It is Coastal Carolina. They're on the road. They're facing off against Jacksonville State. Jacksonville State, a 6.5 to a 7.5 point favorite. Totals between 138 to 139.5. Set a total of 140.5. I do like the over. Now, Coastal Carolina outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game last season, but also not a team that created any ball pressure whatsoever. Out of 364 Division I teams last year, 364th in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. Now, Justin Gray was able to bring back one of his top scorers from the season ago, Rasheed Jones. He's been solid thus far, averaging 16 points per game, and I like the pickup of AJ Dantzler. He was over at Lemoyne last year where he shot 40% for 3, 15 points per contest. He was able to give the team a steal per contest, but not necessarily a great defender. Lemoyne had some sketchy defense, to say the least. They did lose their big man in Noah Ammenhauser, though, so Jerry Nogogpad, who began his career over at, I believe, Seton Hall along with Louisiana Monroe last few seasons, is going to need to step up a little bit for this team, and that's a big reason why I did set Jacksonville State as an 8.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay it. Jacksonville State year in and year out is a top 50 team in terms of rebound percentage under Ray Harper. This team always plays very slowly. They're outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game on the regular, and even though they do lose pretty much 4 of their top 5 scores from a season ago, I like the pickup of Mustafa El Montequil. He was over at Louisiana last year doing a bit of everything, 14 points, 5 boards, a steal per contest, so he does a nice job helping that out, and last year he really didn't attempt threes. He's really been able to pick it up from 3-point range this season, so you've got a little bit more versatility there. This is a much smaller team than we've seen from Jacksonville State in the past. Pretty much all but one of their guys in the rotation are 6'6" or smaller, but they do a good job of having guys that aren't afraid to get their nose-to-read. Like, Marcus Fitzgerald has been playing college basketball since the COVID years. Like, this guy's been around the block, a career 33% three-point shooter, 11.5 points per contest in 4 seasons over at Tennessee State, so he's a good leader there. A.C. Bryant is someone that was solid over at Alabama A&M last year, a team that played very up-tempo. He was able to generate a steal and a half per contest, shot 40% from 3 in Jacksonville State. They did have to replace one of the top scorers in all of college basketball last year in Jerome Pierre. They did it by committee, and I thought that they did so relatively well. Will this team take a little bit of a setback with regards to rebounding? Probably, but you've got Benoko Vangu, who he has come over from Angola, and he's actually given the team 13 rebounds per game thus far. Not too much of a score, but this is a team that's looking to go deep into their bench. I do think that Jacksonville State going to get the job done against the Coastal Carolina team that just doesn't have the post presence that they've had in the past. And I do think that even though you get a slower game, you get a very clean game with neither of these teams generating any turnovers whatsoever from a season ago. So I told 140.5. I do like the over, and I'm going to be willing to lay up to 8 here with Jacksonville State. 837, 838 on the card. Furman is on the road against Northern Iowa. Northern Iowa is a favorite of 10 to 10.5 points. So on this game, it is 143 to 143.5, and I made a total of 146.5. I do like the over. For Furman, this is a team that year in and year out is always in the top 100 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. A pretty efficient offense. Typically, they have a little bit of difficulty in terms of their defense, and right now, Bob Ritchie's team has very much underachieved. That loss that they took to High Point, no shame in losing High Point, but losing 97 to 71, need to be a little bit better there, and it's been a little bit surprising to see Tom House have the lackluster start to the season that he has. Last year, he gave the team 7 points per contest, was a nice 6 man that shot 40% from 3, just 5.3 points per game in his first 3 games thus far this season, so he's going to need to pick it up. Now, I do love the game of Charles Johnson, guy that's saying 6'11", a career 36% three-point shooter. Last year was more of an ancillary role guy, was able to give the team 5.5 points per contest. They did lose a lot of their key guards from a season ago, like PJ Smith, Nick Anderson. Those guys are out of the fold, but Cooper Bowser is back after he was giving the team 8 points per contest. Johnson was one of those guys that was a nice ancillary piece from a season ago, so we'll see how everything fits together for Furman because they do have some nice size. Bowser is another guy that saying 6'11". Ben Vanderwald is 6'7". He's got a little bit of versatility as well, but they're looking to a freshman at Alex Wilkins to be able to run the point. Now, I do think that this summer has went a little bit too far. With Northern Iowa, they do retain a lot of their pieces from a season ago, and I do think that it was a really good coup for them that they were able to get Leon Bond from Virginia a few seasons ago. He should be able to flourish in this system. He's been averaging 17 points per contest to begin the season. Ben Schwieger has been with the program for a few years, and I do think that the main attraction is actually Trey Campbell, who last year, 11.5 points, shot 42% from 3-point range, 4 boards, 3 assists, steal and a half per contest. Just a nice little do-it-all sort of guy. This is a Northern Iowa team that's not going to grab a lot of second and third chances. They don't have a lot of size, and last year outside the top 300 in terms of their rebound percentage, and right now they're shooting 63% at the free throw line. This team should be much better at the free throw line than that, but they're also shooting north of 39% from 3-point range, and they're allowing their opponents to shoot only 25.5% from 3. That should be going northward, this Furman style. I do think that with the way that they bomb it from 3, they're currently shooting less than 29% from 3. That should be going northward, so I do think that there's a little bit of regression on both sides here. I think that Richie's team is going to be set to be able to keep this game within single digits. I do think that Northern Iowa, the better team here, but with Northern Iowa not necessarily having a lot of size, not really being able to get second chances, I think that keeps Furman lively, but I do think that you get a pair of teams that, even though they're not up-tempo, they bomb it from 3, and I think that they're going to be able to hit their 3. So I did somebody total 146.5. I like the over and the points here with Furman. 839, 840 on the card. Iona is going to be playing us with Fordham, and Fordham is a pretty good size underdog here of 5.5 points, and the total on this game, it is 158.5. I'm going to be willing to lay with Iona. I set them as a 9.5 point favorite. The Mike Magpio era just has not been able to get rocking and rolling thus far in the great state of New York. Now, I do think that they're doing for some positivity. Fordham is currently shooting less than 28% from 3-point range in their first 2 games against Division I teams. They beat up on a non-Division I team, in which that was just a complete and utter bludgeoning, but for this Fordham team, they're right now averaging 62 points per game against Division I teams, and that was against the New Jersey Institute of Technology and Wagner. Now, Wagner, a very slow, controlled team, so that's a little bit more forgivable, and I am a big believer in Mike Magpio as coach. I do think that he's going to be able to get things online, but for this team, it just feels like they've got a lot of guys that they don't really know their role right now, because I thought that they brought in some nice pieces in the transfer portal. DeJure Reeves was a nice double-figure scorer over at Iona, ironically enough, and he began his career in Northern Colorado as well. Zariq Nutter is someone that was a do-it-all sort of guy over at Georgia State last year, 14 points, 3 boards, 2 assists, mid-33-point shooter, but that said, they have yet to have one person really take ownership of the point guard spot. It looks like Christian Henry might be that guy who was a solid double-figure scorer over at Eastern Michigan, but has not really been able to get his offense unlocked. And for Fordham, they probably are going to be playing a little bit more lower tempo this season. Mike Magpaio's team, when he was over at UC Riverside, they were very slow to start out with, and then with each progressive year, they got a little bit faster. And for Iona, this is a team that's just flat out looking to gun it. Let's call it what it is. Dan Garreau, he was an assistant with the New Orleans Pelicans, and he's got his team scoring 186 points in the first 2 games this season. Now, they've also shot over 44% from 3 points. Should see a little bit of regression there, but Denver England, someone who was over at Rice, go Owls, he's a career nearly 40% 3-point shooter, was shooting 40% from distance last year. He's been able to give this team some relatively good production. It is an Iona team that is going to be looking to play a little bit more positionless basketball. Really, other than Aliu Fall, who stands 6'10", he's a freshman that comes in from Sweden. You don't have anyone that's really above 6'8" with regards to this rotation for Iona. Lots of guys that stand like 6'5", 6'6". They're able to shoot it from 3-point range, and it's actually been Kosei Ametu who has been the top scorer for this team, comes in after he just couldn't get out there on the floor the last few seasons over at Santa Clara, but he's been able to flourish very well, and it's very much a new-look team. Like, the lone player that really was a holdover from last year was Luke Jungers, and he has given the team pretty much nothing thus far this season, but I do think that Fordham is going to be looking to slow things down. I think that Fordham is going to be able to do a nice job in terms of holding up on the glass as well, because they do have a bit more size. They bring in a big man in Abbas Barja. Hopefully I said that correct. He's a gentleman that comes over from Australia, and you've got a big-time Australian pipeline as well. Akira Jacobs, who began his career over at Hawaii, he comes in. Rur Akura, he's another one as well. So you've got a lot of these guys that stand 6'9", 6'10", that can pop it from 3, that are all up and down the boulevard for this Fordham team that come over from Australia. So I do think that that size is going to be able to give them a little bit of fight. That said, with Iona, I've been very impressed by them, and it just feels like with Mike Magpaio's system, it's taken a little bit more time for it to take hold than that of Iona's. I actually do think that Iona gets slowed down a little bit more on the offensive side of things. That's a big reason why I did set my total here at a 147.5. I like the under, but I just simply don't think that Fordham does their part with this total. A Fordham team that has been doing a good job in terms of generating turnovers, but has also been allowing opponents to shoot over 47% from 3-point range in their first 2 games against Division I opponents. So I did set Iona as a 9.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay it with Iona, and I'm going to be in on this total under as well. 841, 842 on the card. It is Indiana State, and the Sycamores are on the road against Duke. And Duke is a very sizable favorite here of 36.5 to 37.5 points. Saw this game between 161.5 to a 162.5, and I think that Duke should be a big-time favorite. I could only set them as a favorite of 31.5 points. So for Indiana State, this is an up-tempo team. Last year, top 40 team in terms of total possessions per game. Where they really went wrong was on the turnover front. They were outside the top 300 in terms of ball security. They returned the ball over 14 times per contest. They seem to have cleaned that up a little bit, bringing in Sterling Young, who is a very rock-solid scorer over at Florida A&M last year, where he was putting in there 17 points. He was shooting about 35% from 3. That helps out this offense a little bit. You've got a pair of guys in Camp Wagner along with Marcus Harding, who, they weren't primary scorers last year, but they're guys that have been around the system a little bit. I do think that them coming back is very big. Wagner is 6'6", so he gives you a little bit of stretchability, and Harding at 6'10", he's able to pop it from 3-point range, so he does have a little bit that he's able to offer there. Your main guy thus far has actually been Ian Scott. He comes up from the non-Division I ranks, 14 points, 10 rebounds per game. This is an Indiana State team that it looks like they're going to be doing a better job in terms of being able to secure second and third chances, and for Indiana State, they are allowing their opponents to shoot over 36% from 3-point range. That defense was a little bit of an issue for them last season, but it's not as if they're going up against a Duke team that is going to be looking to absolutely run it and gun it. Like, a misnomer with Duke is that this is like some sort of a high-octane offense or something like that. It's an incredibly efficient offense. Number 1 in all of college basketball in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but last year they were about 275th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. The way that they were able to dominate games was because, for one, their efficiency, and then they were top 5 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, top 10 team in terms of rebound percentage, and I think that they're going to control the boards here. Patrick Ngogpop, he's back from a season ago. I said that last name incorrect, but 6'11" big man named Patrick, who's back after he last year was more of an ancillary guy, lost in the shadow of Cooper Flagg and company. He's been able to step up big time. You bring back Caleb Foster, who he's been willing to accept a little bit of a small role over the last few years, as Isaiah Evans has really been the main attraction in the backcourt. Evans last year shot 41% from 3-point range, right now supplying the team with 16 points per game. And then Cameron Boozer, obviously he's doing a little bit of everything. He's not necessarily the most efficient 3-point shooter, but is able to pop it from 3 with good size. He's given out 4 assists, 18 plus points per contest. And is Duke going to be able to win this game or win this game handily? I certainly do think so. That said, I don't don't quite think that this is going to be the big giant blowout that a lot of people think, with Indiana State bringing back some pieces from a season ago. And Duke, not as a team that generates a ton of turnovers, about league average team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis last year at about 180th, so that'll up on an Indiana State team, in which that was their big weakness. I did set my total at a 161.5. I think that Indiana State is going to be looking to run here. 162 becomes my buy point on the under, and I'm willing to take the points here with Indiana State. 843, 844 on the card. Kentucky is playing us to Eastern Illinois. 38 to 39.5 point underdog. So it was between 148.5 to 150. You know that Kentucky is going to be a little bit cheesed off at the fact that they did not win that game against Louisville. I felt like this line should be 27.5, though. I'm going to be willing to take the points. Yes, Kentucky is a much better team than Eastern Illinois. Let's call it what it is. But I actually like what Marty Simmons has been doing over here at Eastern Illinois, and I think that they've got the chance to be able to give Kentucky a little bit of a trickle, because you bring back Zion for a nice double-figure score from a season ago. Cooper Jacoby is not going to be able to win the battle down low because he's only 6'6", but I mean, he's a relatively versatile guy that last year gave the team 9 boards, 12 points, shot in the mid-30s from 3-point range. I do like his overall game, and is he going to be able to match up with Malachi Marino, Brandon Garrison? No, but the big men in that loss over against Louisville left a bit of something to be desired for Kentucky, and I do think that you're having a bunch here in Eastern Illinois that's doing a good job figuring things out in the backcourt. Preston Turner, he comes in from the non-Division I ranks. Turner down for what? For the fact that he's been able to give you 10.5 points per contest. And for Kentucky, obviously Otega Owe is going to be the best guard in this game. 15 plus points per contest last season. Such a solid 3-point shooter. Now you've got Jalen Lowe to allow him to play off the ball just a little bit more and to be able to give you a bit of facilitation. But for Lowe, he hasn't not necessarily been able to give you a ton of scoring. And actually their top scorer has been Denzel Aberdeen, who comes over from Florida with about 16 points per contest. We've seen Kellen Chandler really be able to take some strides forward this year. He's had some big giant highlight reel moments, but that said, I think that Eastern Illinois going to be able to hold within this big giant number. Eastern Illinois has always been a team that's been pretty solid in terms of generating turnovers, and you look at Kentucky this year. Outside the game against Louisville, they played against two very outmatched teams. They were able to take it to Nichols, they were able to take it to Valparaiso, but they've only generated 27 turnovers in their first 3 games of the season. So lots of clean possessions to be had here for Eastern Illinois. As a result, I did set a total of a 159.5. I do like the over, and I'm going to be willing to take those points with Eastern Illinois. 845, 846 on the board. It is from the Intuit Dome, USC and Illinois State. Illinois State, a 16.5 point underdog, totals between 156.5 to 157.5. It's technically a neutral court game, but this is being played in the state of California in Los Angeles, so pretty much home game here for USC, but I only set them as 15-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Illinois State. Illinois State coming off of being a top 45 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis last season, and certainly they have a lot of firepower with Rodney Rice and company for USC there. And you do have Terrence Williams as a holdover from last season. 2 years ago was a very nice rebounder over at Michigan. Last year was limited to less than 5 games due to injury. He should be able to win that battle down low, but I don't think that he completely dominates the way that a lot of people think, because this Illinois State team has some size. Brandon Lieb, who began his career over at Illinois, is a true 7-footer, and then Chase Walker last year is a load 6'9", like 290 pounds. Last season, he was able to shoot 36% from 3, 15 points, 6 boards, like sort of a Glenn Big Baby Davis 2.0. I have to absolutely love his game. And then you've got really good 3-point shooting for this team. They've got Landon Moore coming in after he was a really good scorer many years ago over at St. Francis of Pennsylvania, career 34% 3-point shooter. Just had a tough time being able to crack the rotation over at Butler the last few seasons. Johnny Kinzinger, he's a guy that returns after last year, 14.5 points, 38.5% 3-point shooting. And Bowden Skunberg, great name. He comes over from North Dakota State. Last year was dealing with injury. 2 years ago over at North Dakota State, mid-30s 3-point shooter, 14 points, 5.5 boards. Good versatility there. And for USC, they've got a lot of transfers in, and typically with Eric Musselman teams like this one that they've got for USC, it takes a little bit of time for them to find their rotations. Now, it does help that you've got Chad Baker-Mazar in his 500th year of college basketball, so he's been in so many different rotations, so he probably knows his role right now. He's given the team 19 points per contest to begin this season. Then you've got good versatility with someone like Jacob Kofi, who comes over from Virginia, 6'10". He doesn't actually shoot it well from 3, but he's able to pop it from 3. Jaden Brownell, he comes over from Sam Amford, where last season 14 points on nearly 40% 3-point shooting, but a lot of these guys are taking on new roles. How do you fit in there? 7'3" Gabe Dines, who is one of the best shot blockers in all of college basketball. I think Illinois State finds a way to be able to hold in there in a game that I think she's some very good 3-point shooting as Illinois State last year. Outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game, but but they were also a team that was outside the top 250 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Did look a little bit better with their defense against Ohio, and this is a neutral court game, so I did set my total here at a 155, at the 156 plus in on the under, and the points with Illinois State, 847, 848 on the card. It is SIU Edwardsville. They are on the road against Drake, and the Drake is a favorite of 6 to 6.5 points. Total on this game, you're getting it between 138 to 139.5, and with the Drake, I did set them as an 8-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. Edwardsville has been playing some solid defense, but not a lot of offense. In their last game against Indiana State, who is one of the more up-tempo teams and one of the lesser defenses in all of college basketball last season, they were unable to get past the 60-point plateau. Like, that's something that they do need to work on a little bit now. They're in a bit of transition because last year it was really a case where they were headlined by Rayshon Taylor. He was able to do a little bit of everything, give you 15 plus points per contest. He would throw in there like 5 boards, 4 assists, and that changing of the guard is going to be very big because they can't necessarily do it with one guy, though they do bring back 2 really nice like number 3, number 4 options. Joe Valeri, who's staying 6'5", he's got a little bit of versatility. He's been able to pull in there 8 plus rebounds per game in the early goings. Miles Thompson, he was a well over 40% 3-point shooter last season as well, so that helps. And then Ring Malaith, he's a guy that stands right around about 6'8", 6'9". He's doing a good job, be able to pull in there some boards, has the ability to pop it from 3. Is not necessarily the world's most efficient 3-point shooter, but he is able to pop it from 3-point range, but that still leaves a question mark as to who that main facilitator is going to be, and it feels like they have not necessarily found it. Jack Champion, who was over at Southern Indiana a few seasons ago, not too much of a scorer, but is a little bit more of a facilitator, seems like he might be able to take on that mantle, but I think that that's the big advantage that you've got if you're Drake. A Drake team has been a little bit rough here in the first few games under Eric Henderson, who he knows what that he's doing as a coach. We saw what he was able to do over at South Dakota State. Did a nice job in terms of bringing some of the guys with him. This is a little bit of a blend of a few guys that he was able to bring with him and some shrewd pickup moves in the transfer portal. So there are guys that know this system quite well. As for Drake, one of their main headline guys right now has been the fact that you've been able to get 16 points per contest out of Jalen Quinn. He's a guy that stayed within the Missouri Valley Conference as he was over at Loyola Chicago. And then they bring in Oku Frederico. If I'm not mistaken, that is of relation to Frederico. So nice. They named him twice, but you could use a little bit more out of someone like a Exactly Wilgins, who's been able to give you about 8 or so rebounds per game. He's a guy that comes on over from Bowling Green, where he was a bit of a reserve. I know that he's a guy that has really been able to rise up, if I'm not mistaken, began his career at the non-Division I level, and this has been a unit that has been dealing with a few injuries because a lot of the guys that did come over, like an Owen Larson from South Dakota State, he has yet to hit the floor this far this season, so that's something that did have to have me docking Drake a little bit. But again, with this offense for SIU Edwardsville, just feels like they're in a lot of transition right now, and it's a Drake team that it looks like they're going to be relatively mid-tempo. You notice for Henderson, his teams that were very high octane to begin his career over at South Dakota State, they slowed things down just a little bit, but I do think that you see a little bit more of a scoring punch here. I do think that SIU Edwardsville is going to be able to find it a little bit more against a Drake team that is not going to put a lot of ball pressure on you. I do think that they're going to be a solid defense, but they're not going to be a team that generates turnovers or anything like that. And with Edwardsville, one of the big keys for them is the fact that they have been turning the ball over darn near 15 times per contest. Those clean possessions should allow for a little bit of a higher scoring game. So I did set my total here at a 142. Like the over, and with Drake, I'm willing to lay up to 7.5 with them. 849, 850 on the card. It is Ole Miss, and they play out CS Bakersfield. Meep, the Roadrunners are an underdog of 24.5 to 25.5 points. 146 to 146.5 is the total, and I said Ole Miss is a 28-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number for Bakersfield. This was supposed to be like a Rod Barnes tribute game, who was the coach over at Bakersfield, and then you had the trafficking situation happen. That's not great, to say the least. So now they're under the tutelage of Mike Scott, who has gotten this team off to a 2-1 start. He managed to pretty much maintain everyone from the roster. Nobody jumped ship or anything like that after we saw everything go down, so a little bit of credit to Mike Scott there. That said, this is a unit that is looking a little bit different. For Bakersfield, they've always been a relatively slow and controlled team that really doesn't bomb it from 3. Well, they're not bombing it from 3 right now. They're currently in the bottom 25 in all of college basketball in terms of percentage of their shots that come from 3-point range, and probably that's why they are shooting 28% from three-point range, but they've been generating a lot of turnovers. They've generated darn near 16 turnovers per game, albeit part of it is because they had a 91 game against Whittier, the Poets, that they were able to really take it to them there, and another game against a Western Illinois team that just is not very great with regards to their backcourt, but you do have to like the fact that they bring in Dallin Smith. He was over at Alabama A&M last year, where he was supplying that team with 14 points, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range, so he does a nice job in terms of maybe giving you a little bit of this and that, and because they did lose quite a few of their top guys from a season ago, CJ Hardy, who was one of the main holdovers, they started last year, 9.5 points, shot 44% from three-point range. He's going to need to be a little bit of a higher volume guy this season, and Bakersfield, over the last few seasons, has always had one of those main headline guys. Last year was Jameel Jones, who was able to supply 19 points per contest. Prior to that, Caleb Higgins was that 18 point per game scorer, where nobody else on the roster was averaging more than 9 points per contest. You don't have quite as much of that this season. You're going to be looking at it too. Someone like an AJ George, who 2 seasons ago over at Long Beach State was averaging 11 points per game, and I just don't know if Mike Scott's team is going to be able to hold up there against an Ole Miss team that they just have so much positionless basketball. Malik Dia is a guy that's saying 6'9". Last year shot in the mid-30s from three-point range. He looks to be even more efficient this year. They've had AJ Storr come in after it didn't work out for him over at Kansas last year. He's showing that form that he had over at Wisconsin 2 years ago. Elias Carminde, hopefully I said that correct, the international man of mystery that comes on over from France. He's been able to supply the team with a combined 54 points here in the first 3 games of the season. So you've got a lot of guys that they just stand like 6'5", 6'6". They're burying threes. They do a nice job in terms of being able to guard multiple positions. And then you bring in James Scott, who was over at Louisville last year. He's been a rock solid rebounder. He and Corin Johnson are both guys that transferred on over from Louisville. I love these teams that they bring in the compound transfers. That's something that Ole Miss was able to do with those 2 guys. For Ole Miss, this is not necessarily a team that's going to completely gun it. For Chris Beard's team, they're typically in the mid-tempo with regards to total possessions per game. Not necessarily super duper fast, not necessarily super duper slow, and I was talking about it with this Cal State Bakersfield team. Traditionally, this is a little bit more of a slow and controlled team. Reason to believe that they might be a little bit faster this year. They're inside the top 200 with regards to total possessions per game right now, so they've been cranking it up a little bit more. Not to say that they've been playing at warp speed or anything like that. On Ole Miss, they're another team that's right around about 200th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, but a Bakersfield team that I think is going to struggle in terms of being able to guard the arc. Typically, Bakersfield owns glass. They don't necessarily have a ton of size. I think that Ole Miss runs a rough shot over them. Semi-total 152. I like the over, and for Ole Miss, I'm going to be willing to lay up to 27.5 with them. 851, 852 on the betting board. It is Central Florida. They're on the road against Texas A&M, and Texas A&M is a good-sized favorite of 10.5 points. 168.5 to 170 is a total, and I mean a total of 164.5. I'm going to be willing to take a shot here on the under. For Central Florida, Saints last season, Johnny Dawkins' teams have never really been pushing tempo. Now, I do think that it's a little bit more of a mainstay what we saw from last season, but at the same time, you take a look at the Central Florida team after they were a top 5 team in all of college basketball in terms of total possessions per game last year. They're hovering more around 97th here in this small sample size thus far this season. Their numbers just don't look great because they got it taken to them by Vanderbilt a few nights ago, and that Vanderbilt team is going to be really, really good. So I did set a total here of a 164.5. I'm going to be taking a shot on the under for Central Florida. They don't have quite as much size as they did a season ago because your main big man in Mustafa team was doing a nice job giving that team multiple blocks per contest, clogging things up down low. He's now on the fold. He's over at Cincinnati, but they did add a few nice pieces in the transfer portal, including a guy in Devin Cambridge who, if you're able to get this guy healthy, you have to go back like 3 years ago, and he was a guy that was averaging 10.5 points, 4.5 boards at the power conference level, so he's able to give you a little bit of this and that. Themis Folks along Michael Silwell both come in from UW Milwaukee. I love teams that bring in transfers from the same school. Multiple guys from the same school. Folks is a guy that doled out 4+ assists per contest both at Louisiana along with Milwaukee, and then Stillwell was one of the better rebounders in all of college basketball. Not a ton of size with him at like 6'7", but just a muscular load of a man that was able to give you 10 boards per contest a year ago. And then Riley Kugel, I think, is the X factor. I still remember 2 years ago, back when he was over at Florida, he had this just Herculean run towards the back half of SEC play, where in like the final 10 games, he was averaging 13+ points per contest, and he had supplied the team with 60 points in the first 3 games of the season. Then you've got 7'2" John Bull, who comes on over from Ole Miss, a guy that's able to stretch a floor. He's another one of those bulls, and they all are able to pop it bit from three-point range. And then on the other end for Texas A&M, just still feels like they're trying to figure out what they've got. They were able to dominate two lesser opponents to begin the season, then they got dump trucked by Oklahoma State a few nights ago. And this is a team under Bucky McMillan that they are going to be able to generate some turnovers. Bucky McMillan's teams were always solid there, but then they would give up the arc as well. And for Bucky McMillan's teams, they've been averaging 16 turnovers per game. So I do think that things get a little bit sloppier here, but what are you going to be able to get out of some of these bigger men? Because you've got someone like a Frederico, someone nice, they named him twice. He's never really been in truly an up-tempo system. They bring in Ali Abdu-Diba, the top scorer from Southern Illinois. He joined the process late. He looks like a little bit of a fish out of water. I mean, Marcus Hill is a nice go-to scorer. He was over at Bowling Green and NC State the last 2 seasons flying double figures, but he's been a career 26% three-point shooter. That really doesn't fit the McMillan system. So you do have a few pieces that it just feels like they're a little bit disjointed. Pop Isaacs has only been averaging 7.5 points per contest. He was thought to be one of the heads of the snake. You just have not been able to find that main facilitator. I do think that that's going to work to the advantage of Central Florida, and I do think that with Texas A&M, the defense is right now ahead of the offense with the way that they are generating turnovers, so I do think that you get a little bit of a lower scoring game. I did set my total as a result at a 164.5. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the under on Central Florida. Made them an 8.5 point dog, so being able to be 9+, I'm taking those points with the Knights. 853, 854 on the card. Texas Tech, they play us to UW-Milwaukee. UW-Milwaukee, a very sizable underdog here. You're going to be catching between 27.5 to 28.5 points. So on this game, it is 161.5 and made Texas Tech the 25.5 point favorite. So I'm going to be willing to take those points with Milwaukee. Now with Milwaukee, it's been a little bit up, down, all around for them to begin the season, but I do think that even though you lose Jermichael Sowell, this is still going to be one of the better rebounding teams in all of college basketball. Last year, number 4 in all of college basketball with regards to rebound percentage, and even though you don't necessarily have that one guy that's going to supply you with 10+ rebounds per game, right now you've got a pair of guys that have been able to do a good job in tandem in Daniil Jonovic, who began his career over at SMU, and Faison Fields, who's been in the program for like 5 years now. They've been able to combine for about 11 rebounds per game. Amar Uyagard was a very highly touted transfer coming up from the junior college ranks that was over at Fresno State last year. He was averaging double figures, and then he just decided to leave the program. Probably a good move because then they would be found to have a gambling scandal, so he was able to avoid that. But Seth Hubbard, are you going to be able to unlock what he was able to do a few seasons ago when this guy was a very rock-solid double-figure scorer over at Western Michigan? Last year at Toledo was a little bit more of an ancillary guy, so he's been a career about 32% three-point shooter. This is not a Milwaukee team that's going to be wowing you in terms of their three-point shooting, but I do think that for UW-Milwaukee, they have a chance with their size to be able to hold in there, and they're going to need every bit of it because you've got a guy in JT Toppin that, even though Texas Tech loses that game against Illinois a few nights ago, he had 31 points. He was a complete dominator, and he's looking like one of the most just beastly forces in all of college basketball right now. Christian Anderson had a rough night, though, against Illinois. He overall for the season has been doling out nearly 10 assists per contest with Darian Williams out. He needs to take ownership of the backcourt, but he had a little bit of a silent night there. For Texas Tech overall, they're shooting about 37% from three-point range. Luan Watts, who comes over from Washington State, he's been able to give this team a nice little spark, but it was he and JT Toppin and nobody else who really were able to supply double figures for this team a few nights ago, and you have to have some question marks with the likes of Tyree Bryan, Donovan Atwell. These were really nice three-point shooters and overall contributors at their respective schools. Atwell, Greensboro, and Tyree Bryan, he comes on over from Santa Clara. They're taking a big step up, and with this Texas Tech team, it doesn't feel like they have quite the same amount of depth that they did a season ago. Now, I do think that they're going to be able to get the job done rather handily against UW-Milwaukee, but I do think that this line is a little bit inflated. Set my line at 25.5. I'm going to be willing to take those points with Milwaukee, and I did set my total at a 149.5. I do think that this Texas Tech team gets a little bit more online with their three-point shooting, but I also do think that UW-Milwaukee is going to be able to hold up on the glass a little bit better than people expect. Milwaukee, a little bit of an up-tempo team, but again, they don't necessarily have a ton of three-point shooting themselves, so I'm in on the under and the points here with UW-Milwaukee. 855, 856 on the board. The X-Men Xavier is on the road against Iowa. Iowa is a 14.5 to a 15-point favorite, and your total on this game, it is 144.5, and with Iowa, I set them as a 12.5-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Xavier. Now, Xavier, it's been a less than savory run to begin the season, to say the least, as you bring in the younger Pitino and Richard Pitino, and he's relying upon a lot of guys taking the leap on up from the mid-major ranks to the high major ranks. Like, all right, that's a great name, by the way. He comes on over from Valparaiso, where he's given the team 15-plus points, was one of the main facilitators, but they've really been looking to Malik Moore. He was solid over at Montana last year, like 10.5 points, a few assists per contest. He's really been their main facilitator this year. Roddy Anderson has been a really nice go-to scorer with about 17 points per contest, but I mean, that's a guy that was like a nice ancillary piece over at Boise State last year with 6.5 points, shot less than 30% from 3-point. Just doesn't feel like a Big 12 roster. That said, I do think that they do just enough to be a hold in there against an Iowa team that I recognize that they hung the 100 spot against Robert Morris to begin the season, but this is not a team that's really going to be pushing tempo. You take a look at the Ben McCollum system over at Drake last year. They were dead last in the country in terms of possessions per 40 minutes. I do think that they might be a little bit more up-tempo this year because if you look at McCollum and the way they coach at the D2 ranks, it seems we're a little bit faster, and a lot of these guys were a part of those systems, like Bennett Sturts, who's been able to give you a combined 43 points in the first 2 games of the season. He's one of those guys that came over. Tavion Banks is another guy that came on over as well. He's been a rock-solid 10-plus point per game scorer. You got Alvaro Fogurius, who comes over from Robert Morris. That's a really nice ad. Last year was giving that team 16 points, 9 boards, shooting about 40% from 3-point range, and for Iowa thus far, they have really been able to bomb it from 3, 17 out of 40 from 3-point range in their first 2 games of the season. I do think that they're going to experience a little bit more strife here with Xavier. I do think that Xavier is going to be a better defensive team rather than an offensive team, and with Richard Pitino, you take a look at what he did over in New Mexico last season. His team was in the top 20 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. So this is a circumstance where I did set my total at a 144.5. Going to be waiting upon a little bit of line movement with regards to this total. If we get to a 144 or less, in on the over 145 or higher, the under is mostly seeing 144.5 out there. But that said, here at the 14.5, I'm on those points with Xavier. 857, 858 on the card. It is Sam Hanford on the road against Arkansas. Arkansas is a 25.5 to a 26.5 point favorite, and your total, it is 161.5. And with Sam Hanford, I set them as a underdog of 25.5 points. So 26 becomes my buy point here. And as we were talking about Nate Hornung, I do think that this is going to be an up-tempo game. I set my total 165.5. I'm in on the over. You've got Samford going through a little bit of a changeover with having Lenny Acuff taking over for Bucky McMillan. Acuff, his team over at Lipscomb last year was not necessarily super up-tempo, but his teams have always been able to flow good offense, going all the way back to his Division II ranks days over at Alabama Huntsville, and he brought in a pair of guys in the Norris brothers and Keaton Norris that I think are going to be able to elevate this offense. He brings with him Dylan Faulkner, who was over at Lipscomb, not a guy that's going to stretch the floor and pop it from 3, but he does a nice job down low when he was fully healthy for the 15 games that he played last year. 10.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, and a little bit over a block and a half per contest, so that helps him hold up there. But then you bring in a guy from Queens NC and Jackson Pollard, who's used to playing up and down. Last year was shooting about 40% from 3-point, so you've got some guys on this roster. They're able to rip it. Cam Martin is another one of those guys, hasn't seen a lot of minutes, but over at Long Beach State 8 seasons ago, he was playing 8.5 points, shot in the mid-30s from 3-point range. And on the flip side of things, you do have an Arkansas team that, they've got an Acuff of their own that has been able to do a very good job of, as a freshman, of being able to give this team some double figures. So you do have to like that for this Arkansas team. They have been one of the most prolific offenses in all of college basketball. We did see them get slowed up against Michigan State, but Michigan State, that's going to be one of your better defensive teams in the country, so I don't necessarily have too much of a knock there, especially with having to go to the Breslin Center, but you do need to get a little bit more out of Trevon Brazile. It's been a little bit up and down for him this far this season. At 6'9", he's capable of being able to pop it from 3. He's going to be probably the best rebounder in this game. I think that he's going to be able to take it to Faulkner and DJ Turn It Up Wagner. He has been in the John Calipari system for a very long time, but he and Darius Acuff have been playing really well off of one another, and then the unspoken freshman, Malik Thomas, has actually been your leader in terms of facilitation as well. Lots of really good guard play with this team. And then Malik Ewan, he does a nice job in terms of giving you a little bit of this and that down low. Comes over after he was a pretty nice player over at Florida State last year. Not a guy that's going to really stretch the floor, but you do have an Arkansas team that's looking to play with some tempo. Samford, it feels like they're looking to bump things up as well. So somebody told 165.5. I like the over, and at 26 plus in on those points with Sam Hanford. 859, 860 on the card. It is Brown. And what can Brown do for you? Well, if they get a win against Hampton, they have the chance to make you some money, as they are 2.5 point favorites. Totals between 142.5 to 144.5, and made a total of 141. I do like the under. For Brown, major injury concerns here. Like, in a normal circumstance, Brown would probably be about a touchdown favorite here, but Landon Lewis, who was last year giving the team about 13.5 points, 6.5 rebounds per game, we have not seen him this far this season, and AJ Lesber Jr. is currently the equivalent of Bigfoot. Everyone has heard about him, nobody has seen him this far this season. 10.5 points, 3.5 boards per contest. So, with Brown, that means that you're looking to Adrian Ojadino, who he last season was a little bit of an answering guy that gave you 3.5 points per contest, as you're without Keno Lilly Jr. from a season ago, as well. Brady Laughlin, as a freshman, has had to see unexpected minutes as well. That's not necessarily too great, and for the Hampton team, they do lose quite a bit from a season ago, but I do think that they should be able to cover this number because they do still have a little bit of rebounding that comes back from a season ago. Xavier Long is a guy that is able to give you quite a bit. He, in the first 2 games that he has played in this year, 21 points and 21 rebounds. Last year, he was a do-it-all sort of guy. 6.5 points, 5 boards. He's able to give you a block, a steal per contest, shooting the mid-30s from 3-point. So absolutely love what he's able to bring to the table. They're gambling on Michael Ealy being able to elevate a little bit. 2 seasons ago when he was over at Siena, it was an injury-plagued season, but he was averaging 13 points per contest. Last year, just could not get out there on the floor for Tulane. And then Jaquil Gaines-Wyatt, he was a primary scorer over at Alcorn State last year, where he was supplying about 11.5 points, doling out 3 assists. Not necessarily the world's greatest facilitator, as he does sometimes turn the ball over a little bit, but Etienne Strothers, I think, has a little bit of upside to him. He was a part-time starter for this Hampton team last season that is a little bit more of a pass-first guy, a little bit more defense-oriented, that's able to give you a steal per contest, not going to necessarily light you up with your offense. And then Josh Ogundele, who comes on over from Tennessee State, where he was pretty solid for them last year. He was averaging 6.5 points, a little bit over 4 boards per contest, has just not really been able to find his role with his team quite yet, only averaging about 2.5 points, 4 rebounds per game. I think he's going to have a little bit of a better day down low with Brown currently without Landon Lewis. I did set my lineup 1. I still do think that Brown has a nice home court advantage. I do think that with Hampton, you want to play it a little bit safer here because they've got some moving parts. I don't know what you're going to be able to get out of the freshman, and Quentin Cooper has been relatively solid in the backcourt, so I'm going to be willing to take the points here with Hampton, and did set a total of 141. Brown has been playing very slow without these guys in the fold, so I'm going to be in on the under. 861, 862 on the card. DePaul plays us at Northwestern. Northwestern is a 6.5 to a 7.5 point road favorite, and your total is between 138.5 to a 148.5, and with this total, I did set mine at a 144. I do like the over. I know that DePaul has been lackluster in terms of their offense. We saw that against Buffalo, where they were unable to get to 60 points. I think that we should see a little bit of a rebound here for a DePaul team that's been struggling quite a bit with their 3-point shooting to begin this season, shooting less than 30% from 3-point in their first 3 games, and that was very much highlighted in that Buffalo game. But if you look outside the Buffalo game, 72 points against Stonehill. They put up over 90 points against Chicago State, but Chicago State is Chicago State. But I do think that with having a lot of guys back from a season ago, Landon Blocker and CJ Gunn, pair of guys that were able to do a nice job supplying the team with 9+ points per contest, they should be able to elevate a little bit more there. They brought in someone that I really liked over at Tulane last year, and Caleb Banks began his career over at Indiana, where he over at Tulane last year, 14.5 points, mid-33 point shooter, 6.5 rebounds per game, and I do think that DePaul gives you a much better effort in this game after we saw things just go completely off of the rails in that Buffalo game, and I do think that they're going to be able to do a rock-solid job of folding up down low, bringing back NJ Benson, who was able to give them 7+ rebounds per game, and this is a big-time intercity rivalry, so both of these teams are going to be up for it. I did set a line of a 4. I'm going to be willing to take the points, and for Northwestern, they are going to have the best player in the floor. That is Nick Martinelli, who last year he was supplying the team with 20 points per contest. Now he's got a little bit more help, it feels like, this year as well. With Martinelli, he's been able to give the team 7 boards, and currently shooting 83% from 3. We should see that regress a little bit. And Northwestern here in the first 3 games of the season, they've shot 39% from the outside. I think that they're going to be an efficient team, and Northwestern year in and year out, it doesn't matter who's at the point guard spot. I mean, when they had Boo Boo, he was obviously at a just fever pitch, but I mean, they've always been a really efficient offense. They've only turned the ball over 24 times in the first 3 games of the season, and they always do a great job in terms of being one of the best teams in terms of winning that turnover battle. They've done so thus far this season with having Jaden Reed coming over from South Florida. He's supplying the team with 10 points per contest, and Arrington Page, who began his career over at Cincinnati, has been a guy that has been having a little bit of a long and winding road. He has stepped in, and he has been very good for the team, and combined 42 points in the first 3 games of the season, and I do think that this elevates this offense. Max Green, who comes on over from Holy Cross, he's not going to be playing a massive role for the team, but they just needed to be a one-trick pony sort of guy. Over at Holy Cross last year, 15.5 points, 5.5 boards, 3.5 assists, shot 38% from 3-point. Now they just need him to come in off the bench, be able to can those threes, maybe grab a rebound or 2, and I think that he's fully capable of being able to do so, but I do think that with this DePaul team, they're going to do a rock-solid job down low. We've seen Northwestern over the last few years be a team that's had a little bit of a negative rebound differential, and I know that losing Cooper Enright in the backcourt has been hurting DePaul. They've had a little bit more strife in terms of that point guard spot. And for Northwestern, they certainly have been able to have 3 really nice blowout wins. I believe that they have won by 24 plus points, actually 23 plus points in all 3 of them. But I do think that DePaul is going to hold tough after a really, really bad effort a few nights ago. I think that this is a nice little bit of a rebound spot, and I do think that this is going to be close enough for late game fouling. And even though Northwestern probably going to be outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game once again this season, I do think that they are going to be highly efficient on the offensive side of things. Set a total of a 144, so I do like the over, and I'm going to be willing to take those points with DePaul. 863, 864 on the card. It is Providence, and they are on the road. They're facing off against Colorado. Colorado is anywhere between a 1.5 point favorite to a 1.5 point underdog. You've got half the books making Providence a favorite, half the books making Colorado the favorite, and your total on this game, you're going to be fighting between 163.5 to a 164.5, and I set Providence as a 4-point favorite. I am going to be willing to take them as either a money line underdog or lay a very, very small number with them. For Providence, the defense does not quite seem to be what it was a season ago, and it does feel like they're going to be bumping up their tempo a little bit like last year with Providence. This team was outside the top 225 in terms of total possessions per game. Now, this is a little bit of a warped number because they played an overtime game against Virginia Tech. Currently, they're number 3 in the country in terms of total possessions per game. You take overtime out of it. They're still up-tempo, but they're not necessarily quite that up-tempo. But for this Providence team, I do think that they're going to be able to win from within. Last year, they were a top 50 team in terms of their rebound percentage, and they bring back Oswin. I can't pronounce that last name, so we are just going to call him Oswin, who is averaging 2 blocks per contest in Big East play, and he's come back. He's not necessarily been too much of a scorer, but he's averaging 3.7 blocks, 9 rebounds per game. Ryan Mela has been able to throw in there 8 rebounds per game as well, and then that backcourt of Jason Edwards and Jalen Sellers, that is going to be able to take over this game. Both of these guys have absolutely been cooking, with combining for a little bit over 34 points per contest. It's a Providence team that, even with that overtime game against Virginia Tech, they've still been able to do a solid job in terms of taking care of the ball. Now, they're allowing their opponents to shoot over 39% from 3-point range, and for Colorado, they have seen some very high-scoring games. Their first 2 games of the season, they were really pushed by Eastern Washington. That game went to overtime, and then 84-78, they get that win against Montana State. So they got 2 very big tests. They have shot Colorado at 40% from 3-point range, and they've allowed opponents to shoot 44.4% from 3-point range. I think that's sane to think that they are going to not shoot 40% from 3-point range all season long, and they're also not going to allow opponents to shoot 44.4% from 3-point range. They've got a great home court advantage over there at Boulder at a little bit of elevation, and I do like the backcourt of this team. Barrington Hargress was a 20-point per game scorer over at UC Riverside, and Isaiah Johnson, as a freshman, he's had 41 points in the first 2 games of the season. I think that there's going to be a little bit of regression there, and then you got Bengu Doc, who he's back from a season ago last year for this bunch. He was giving the team about 8 points. He's got a little bit of stretchability, 4 boards, and he's able to pop it from 3, but only shot about 28% from 3-point range last season. Elijah Malone was a very good player at the NAIA level a few seasons ago, and he proved it over at Colorado last year. He was playing that team with 8 points. He was able to throw in there about 3 boards, but he's another guy that tries to pop it from 3, was not necessarily great with that regard, and I do think that with Providence having a little bit more down low and having very experienced guards, bringing in Sellers, Edwards, I do think that backcourt wins out in this one. I do think that we see Colorado do a little bit of a better job of being able to guard the arc, but also see some regression with their 3-point shooting as well. So I did set a total of 152. I like the under, and with this Providence team, I made them the 4-point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to take them on the money lines at underdog / lay that 1 to 1.5. 865, 866 on the card. It is Baylor, and they play us at Tarleton St. Tarleton St is an underdog of 25.5 to 26.5 points. So on this game, it is 154.5, and I'm willing to dive in on Tarleton St. I set them as an underdog of 22.5 points for Tarleton St. This unit has been quite a bit better on offense. I think that we've went too far with this total. Right now, we are seeing that at a 154 plus. I set mine at a 146.5 with Tarleton St. Typically, this is a team that is well outside the top 275 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. As a matter of fact, they were in the bottom 10 with this regard last season. You're bringing a guy like a Dior Johnson, who was one of the more highly touted recruits in all of college basketball a few seasons ago. He's averaging 15 points per game. That elevates you, and bringing back Freddie Hicks, I think, is so big as well. Freddie Hicks was amazing for the team during the 2022-23 campaign. 16 points, 6 boards, 2.5 assists, shot in the mid-30s from 3-point. Had a nice year over at Arkansas State 2 years ago, and then last year he was just dealing with all sorts of injuries. So it's been a little bit of a long and winding road for him. But that said, I do think that this is a circumstance where with Tarleton State, they're going to be able to force a few turnovers on a Baylor team that is in a little bit of transition. And Tarleton State is back to generating turnovers. Last year, they were number 2 in all of college basketball in terms of turnovers force on a per possession basis, just with the personnel, a little bit of changeover, and just a little bit more explosive scoring. I don't think that they're going to be quite that this season, but still, they should be able to force the issue a little bit more on a Baylor team that they bring in Tonde Usufu, who's been very good for this team in the backcourt. He, in his first 2 games as a true freshman, has been able to combine for 37 points. And then you bring in Cameron Carr, who's been really driving this team. He was a top 100 recruit that just couldn't get out there for Tennessee the last 2 seasons, but has stepped in 44 points in the first 2 games of the season. But this is a Baylor squad that I think that they might have a little bit of a tough time with regards to facilitation, as Obi Edgem, who comes over from Wyoming. Right now, he's looked to as that main facilitator, and they've been playing a little bit of a thin rotation. They've been playing relatively a 7-man rotation because they're currently dealing with a few injuries to their big men. We have yet to see Mayu Soyo, hopefully I said that correct, freshman over there, and then the other freshman in Perez. He has not been able to get out there on the floor, coupled with Jocelyn Bodu. Bodu was one of the better shot blockers in all of college basketball in the Big South last season. Michael Rata, he's got good versatility. He comes over from Oregon State at 6'9", was able to shoot in the high 30s from 3-point range, average double figures, and I do think that that's going to throw Tarleton in for a little bit of a loop, as Tarleton is really a positionless sort of team. But Chris Mbakpa, who's been able to be in the program for multiple years, last year was given the team 5+ rebounds per game. I think that he does just enough for this Tarleton team to remain lively, and I do think that things are going to be a little bit sloppier in this game. So I did set my total at a 146.5. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the under, and at anything of 23 plus, taking those points with Tarleton. 867, 868 on the card. Battle of Georgia. The Bulldogs play host to the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Georgia is a 13.5 to a 14-point home favorite. Totals between 147.5 to a 148.5. And I said Georgia is a 15.5-point favorite. I'm willing to lay the number. Georgia has just absolutely pounded the teams that they have played this far this season. 3 games, they've won all of them by 30-plus points. Albeit when you're playing against the likes of Bellarmine, Morehead State, you're not necessarily facing off against great competition. But on the other end for Georgia Tech, they got pushed overtime on their home floor by Maryland Eastern Shore. Looked a little bit better in that game against Bryant, but I mean, it's very clear that Georgia Tech looks to be relatively solid on defense, and their offense is really not great. Meanwhile, for Georgia right now, you've got 4 different guys averaging at least 12 points per contest. Cannon Catchings, who began his career over at Purdue and BYU. He's a former top 50 recruit that's really starting to show his might. Blue Kane is a guy that's been in the system for quite a while. Mid-33-point shooter, does a lot of good things with regards to the backcourt, and they have found themselves a little bit of a trigger man. Marcus Billender has primarily been coming in off the bench, but I mean, he was a really nice do-it-all sort of guard over at South Alabama 2 years ago. Last year at UTSA, meet for the Roadrunners. I mean, he was just a little bit of this and that gadget guard. He shot 44% from 3, but gave you 3 assists, a steal and a half, 15 points per contest. I really like his game and felt like he was a little bit undervalued in the transfer portal. And then Jeremiah Wilkerson, nice double-figure scorer from Cal, does a good job playing off the ball. He's come in as well. And then on the other end, you've got a Georgia Tech team that they've got Bate and Nongo, who should be able to do a nice job down low. Georgia is without RJ Godfrey, one of their top rebounders from a season ago, and he's a career mid-33-point shooter, and he's a guy that's able to put the team on his back, but I mean, he's been a little bit down this year. He's only been able to give the team 9 points, 7.5 rebounds per game, as it's actually been Kawasi Reeves who has been that main headline scorer. He's been averaging about 14 points per contest. This is year number 3 for him in the system. It's always been a career about 32% three-point shooter at Georgia Tech. The 2 years that he spent here, he's been shooting more like 36% from 3 as a 6'6", a little bit of a dual guy. And I do think that there's some positivity due in for this Georgia Tech offense because they bring in Cam Kraft, who last year over at Miami of Ohio shot 43% from 3, 13.5 points per game. Not going to give you any facilitation. It's really a one-trick pony, but is really good with that one trick. But the key here is Lamar Washington. Washington has dealt with injury. He's only been able to play 1 game this far this season for Georgia Tech, so that's caused for a little bit of strife. Did return in that game against Southeast Louisiana. That was still a game where it was tighter than you'd expect, 70-60 win, but I mean, he over at Pacific last year was their main trigger man, 13.5 points, 6 assists, 5 rebounds, but he also turned the ball over darn near 4 times per contest, and this is a Georgia team that they have been a top 5 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis thus far this season. Not going to put a lot of stock into that, but I mean, they've also pounded teams against a similar opponent in Maryland Eastern Shore. Maryland Eastern Shore failed to get past 30 points against Georgia, so it's an interesting circumstance. They've been great on offense, they've been great on defense. I do think that Georgia Tech uplifts themselves a little bit more offensively, so I set a total of 149.5. I like the over, but with the Bulldogs of Georgia, I'm going to be willing to lay up to 15 with them. 869, 870 on the card. It is Montana, and they play host Cal Poly. Cal Poly is an underdog of 4.5 to 5 points. So on this game, it is 170.5. Set a total of 166.5. I'm in on the under for Montana. a relatively up-tempo team last year, about 100th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and they bring back money. Yes, I am talking about Money Williams, who led the team in scoring last year with 13 points, 3 assists per contest. They really need him to step up because guys 2 through 4, like Malik Moore, Joe Pridgeon, Kai Johnson, those are guys that are out of the fold. So Tajon Sawyer, who last year at 6'8", he was able to supply the team with about 9.5 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. He needs to step up in a big way, and at 6'8", able to give you a little bit of 3-point shooting. But for Montana, what has been big for this team, Brooklyn Hicks being able to step it up. He's the guy that began his career over at UNLV and actually saw some decent minutes for them last season. Has never been a prolific 3-point shooter, but last year 4 points, 3 boards per contest as a 6'3", a little bit of a just do it all sort of guard. He's been able to do a nice job for this team, and then additionally you've been able to get some better rebounding from this Montana team because last year they were outside the top 3 in terms of offensive rebound percentage from Tyler Thompson, who's come in at 6'6". He's been able to supply the team with about 6 rebounds per game. And with Cal Poly, this team does not have a lot of size down low. They're a very positionless basketball team, and Mike DeGeorge has done a tremendous job with them. But going from the state of California on over to Missoula, Montana, that's not easy travel, and they did lose pretty much 4 of their top 5 scorers from the season ago. Peter Benjai is your main returner with about 14 points, 3 rebounds per contest, and 6'8" Hamad Musa, who comes over after he began his career at Dayton, just was unable to get out there on the floor last season. He has been tremendous for this team, shooting over 40% from 3, 18 points per contest as a 6'8", very versatile player. But still, I do think that Montana is going to be able to do a nice job in terms of being able to control the boards. It feels like they're a little bit better there, and you do have to fear a little bit of a letdown spot here for Montana because they get that nice win against UNLV, albeit UNLV does not look to be very great this season. But I do think that with this Montana squad, they do find a way to be able to take it to a Cal Poly team that they're super fast. Cal Poly, a top 10 team in terms of total possessions per game last season. They look to be that this year, but very sloppy with the ball, with darn near 17 turnovers per game, and I think that sloppiness allows Montana to be able to cover. I set my line at 8.5, so one to lay with Montana, and on the underside I total 166.5, 871, 872 on the card. It is Michigan. They are on the road. They're facing up against TCU. TCU is a 7.5 to an 8-point underdog. Total this game between 156.5 to a 157.5. Set my line at 7, so at a 7.5 plus, I'm going to be willing to take these points with TCU. TCU, no good, very bad, awful night to begin the season against New Orleans, and still, even though they got the job done against Lamar, that was a little bit alarming as well. This is a TCU team. I think that it's very clear they're not going to be great with their 3-point shooting, but in that night number 1 game against New Orleans shot pretty much 50% from 3. TCU, they shot less than 15% from 3. That's an outlier that is going to iron out throughout the season, and Latavius Levicius, who comes over from Oregon State last year. He was shooting 40% from 3-point range. He should help elevate this team a little bit further. And then Brock Harding, who's not giving you much scoring right now, only about 5 points per contest. He comes over from Iowa. He should do a nice job in terms of facilitating the offense. Last year over at Iowa, it's only about 9 points per game, but 5.3 assists and 2.3 turnovers per game. When they needed him to pop it from 3, he shot darn near 40% from 3. And this team is going to be able to take the punch to you, as you've got David Punch, who's back from a season ago, took some nice strides forward as a big man last season at 6'7", and is he going to have a little bit of an issue with a day along with Yaxel Lendeborg? Absolutely, but still, he's giving you about 7 rebounds per game. TCU is always built around pretty rough and tumble defense under Jamie Dixon, and you've got a Michigan team that they've got all sorts of versatility, as Mara's a guy that's saying 7'3". He's been able to supply the team with 10 blocks in the first 2 games that he has seen thus far this season. Additionally, Lendeborg hasn't necessarily been great in the first 2 games. He's giving you 10.5 points, 4.5 boards. You know that he's going to be better moving forward. So it's actually been Moritz Johnson, who's really been owning things down low. He's been able to give the team 34 points in the first 2 games of the season, and for Michigan, what was really killing them last year was just the turnovers. Last year, they were outside the top 275 in terms of ball security. I love the fact that they brought in Elliot Kadu in the transfer portal over at North Carolina. Always did a good job giving out 4+ assists per contest, was just never really too much of a 3-point shooter, and thus far this season, 21 assists to 6 turnovers in the first 2 games of the season. He's supplying good, clean offense, and it's clear that this Michigan team is looking to run. Last year, they were in the top 50 in terms of total possessions per game. TCU last year was a little bit more of a slow and controlled team. Now, Jamie Dixon's team 2 years ago was a little bit faster, but I do think that TCU going to get a little bit more to their defensive roots. I think that they do just enough to hold up against the big men down low, so it's a circumstance where I did set my line at a 7, getting over 7. I'm going to be willing to take the points with TCU, and I do like the under side by total 155, 873, 874 on the card. Sacramento St, they are on the road. They're facing off against UC Davis. UC Davis, a 5.5 point favorite, totals between 146 147.5 to a 148.5, and I said a total of a 144. I'm going to be in on the under. Now, Mike Bibby does not have a lot of data on him as a coach because, well, for Mike Bibby, he played in the NBA for a long time. I think that he did a little bit with regards to like the G League or something like that. Like, it was a very random hire for Sacramento State. He used to be an analyst. I remember his work there, but that said, he brought in some really nice transfers. Mikey Williams, a former top 100 recruit, he was over at Central Florida last year. He's been able to supply the team with 18.5 points per contest to begin the season. Prophet Johnson was that top scorer over at Fairfield last season. Jeremiah Cherry, he was a big man that was actually seeing starts over at UNLV a season ago, and he's got Shaquille O'Neal as the general manager of this team because his son Shaquille O'Neal is with the program, so that's very intriguing. And right now for Sacramento State, they have shot darn near 47% from three-point range. Much of that is because they started out the year playing against two non-Division I teams. In their game against UC Santa Barbara, that was a run-and-gun sort of game. I actually do think, though, that this UC Santa Barbara team is actually going to be playing a little bit more, shall we say, fast. We're seeing that in their first few games of the season, so I think that makes things a little bit intriguing to take a look at on that front. But that said, I do think that for the Sacramento State team, they're probably going to experience a little bit of a speed bump here against a UC Davis team that they were outside the top 200 in terms of total possessions per game. They were a little bit more of a slow and controlled team, and for UC Davis, their offense was not great last year, outside the top 320 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and typically they look to one primary guy to be able to really ignite the offense, because you had that with Elijah Pepper 2 seasons ago, who was giving you about 20 points per contest. Ty Johnson, he was that do-it-all guy last season. Now for this year for UC Davis, they need to find out who that go-to guy is going to be, because you know that Niko Rokac is going to be that top player down low. He's able to give you about 6 or so rebounds per game. I really like what he's able to bring to the table, and I do think that it could, when it's all said and done, be Connor Sevilla, who he last year gave the team 4 points per contest. He was a good number 2, number 3 option that was able to shoot in the high 30s from three-point range, so there's quite a bit of upside there with UC Davis last year. Even though they turned the ball over a ton, they were also a team that was a top 25 team in all of college basketball in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, and going up against a team in Sacramento State that has a lot of moving parts, that's only played against one Division I team. I do think that that's going to bode quite well for them, but I do think that the presence of Cherry down low is enough for Sacramento State to be able to hold in there on the boards. I do think that this is going to be a sloppier game, so I did make my total at 144. I like the under, and with UC Davis calling set them as 4-point favorites, so being able to get the 5+ here of Sacramento State, going to be in on those points. 875, 876 on the card. It is North Texas. They are the team on the road against St. Mary's. St. Mary's is a 12.5 point favorite. Totals between 130.5 to a 131.5, and I did set a total here of a 138.5. I do like the over for North Texas. Gone are the days of them being a bottom 5 team in terms of total possessions per game down. I don't think that they're going to be absolutely gunning it or anything like that, but that said, you bring in a coach in Daniel Robinson, who was over at Cleveland State last year, and I do think that he's going to take things in a little bit of a different direction, and I mean, we've seen that with the North Texas team averaging about 74 points per contest. Defense has been rock solid. They're giving up fewer than 59 points per contest here in the first few games of the season. They had a narrow loss against Oregon State, and that's the season high that they've given up in terms of points at 66, so I mean, that has been rather impressive, but for North Texas, you do have guys who are able to bomb it from three-point range. You bring in someone who was over at UCLA and San Jose State, and Will McClendon, who he's been primarily a sixth man for the team, but is currently shooting 45% from three, and it is a North Texas team that's shooting over 40% from the outside. Now, Daniel Robinson's teams, where they've always went wrong, has been down low. As you look at Cleveland State last year, they were actually a team that ranked outside the top 300 in terms of their defensive rebound percentage. They allowed opponents to grab over 30.5% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound. Now, you do have Mr. Arnett in Dylan Arnett, who made the trip on over from Cleveland State along with Robinson on over to this program, and he's been able to be a nice 5 to 6 rebound per game guy, but you do have to feel like St. Mary's is going to have a big advantage on the glass. I recognize that you lose Mitchell Saxon from a season ago, but you still have so much size, as we are seeing the 7-footer in Andrew McKeever giving the team 6+ rebounds per game. You got Paulius Marsoukas back from a season ago. He was a nice 15+ point per game scorer, 8+ rebound per game guy a year ago, but we're really seeing the sophomores and Mikey Lewis along with Joshua Dent be able to take hold in the backcourt. Dent really saw no minutes whatsoever, and for Lewis, he was a nice sixth man. When it came to conference play, he was really able to go just inferno mode from three-point range, and I do think that a North Texas team that it looks like they're going to be prioritizing being able to generate turnovers. turnovers. You recall what Robinson's teams did over at Cleveland State. They were one of the best teams in terms of generating turnovers in all of college basketball, and thus far this season, they've been averaging a little bit over 16 turnovers per game. St. Mary's is not a team that is going to be falling for those turnovers, and once you break the pressure, you're able to find some nice open looks with St. Mary's. I don't know if they're going to be able to quite continue shooting 47% from three-point, but Lewis looks to be one of the best overall shooters in all of college basketball. Liam Campbell has been averaging 9 points per game. He's currently shooting 50% from three-point, and as a matter of fact, for the St. Mary's team, among the 6 top scorers that have made at least 1 3 this far this season, all but one of them, and Joshua Dent, shooting at least 42.9% from three-point. Again, I think that there's going to be a little bit of regression there, but St. Mary's is showing that they're a little bit more willing to run. They've been averaging 87 points per game in the first 3 games of the season. They've been able to maintain that solid defense, so did set a little bit of a higher total here. I set mine at a 138.5. I like the over, and with St. Mary's made them a 14.5 point favorite, I'm going to be willing to lay the number. 877, 878 on the card. Loyola Marymount is going to be playing us to Troy, and the men of Troy find themselves as a small underdog here of 2.5 points. 142.5 is the total, and for the Mount, I did set them as a favorite of 5.5 points. So circumstance where I'm going to be willing to lay it. For Troy, you have to have a little bit of question mark with regards to three-point shooting after last year. They're outside the top 300 in terms of three-point shooting percentage. They lose Tatum Connerway from a season ago. They do look to be a little bit improved with that regard. Troy last season was one of the best offensive rebound rate teams in all of college basketball, and they look to have taken a big giant step back there, despite the fact that you bring back Thomas Dowd, who was a guy that gave you 6 rebounds per game a season ago, and then Theo Sang, he's going to be a big part of this team as well. Last year was giving that team about 5.5 points, 3 boards, was a guy that came in off the bench 2 years ago, was a bit of a part-time starter, and he's able to give you a little bit of three-point shooting. Has never really been prolific with his three-point shooting career, about 29% from the outside. And for Loyola Marymount, it looks like they're trying to discover a little bit of a different identity this season in terms of generating turnovers themselves, which was one of the specialties of Troy. Troy was outside the top 300 in terms of ball security last year, but a top 40 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. And for Loyola Marymount, here through 4 games, they've been generating darn near 14 turnovers per game. MJ Amy, who 2 seasons ago over at San Jose State was a 15-plus point per game scorer, last year was a little bit more of an ancillary piece. He looks to be that number 1 guy once again. 16 points per contest as far this season. He's been shooting in the high 30s from three-point range, and Loyola Marymount is currently shooting 42% from 3. You do have to anticipate a little bit of regression there, but Roddy Brown was a really nice ad coming over from Virginia Tech along with Cal, and at Virginia Tech last season, about 4 points per contest. He was shooting over 40% from three-point, was limited due to injury, but he certainly is able to light you up there. Nikel Shelton is a just a little bit of this and that guy that I think fits so well in the system. Last season over at Eastern Illinois, 17 points, 4.5 boards, 2 assists, 2.5 per contest, so he does a nice job of just being able to find a way to contribute in a wide variety of different ways. He was part of an Eastern Illinois team that was good at generating turnovers, and then you've got Jan Vide, who began his career over at UCLA. He's a guy that's been within the system quite a bit as well. It's a Loyola Marymount team that's absolutely been dominating on the glass, by the way, one of the top rebound rate teams in all of college basketball. So with Troy taking a little bit of setback on the glass, I do think that Loyola Marymount finds a way to get the job done. I do think that this is going to be a game close enough for a late game following, and I do think that Troy, who typically is a little bit more of an up-tempo team, not necessarily a super up-tempo team, but a little bit more of an up-tempo team, Loyola Marymount, a little bit slower, but again, not a team that's going to be playing at a sales pace. I do think that they do just enough to get you this over. Semi-total 143.5, like the over, and with Loyola Marymount, willing to lay up to 5 with them. 879, 880 on the card. You've got Arizona and UCLA playing at the Intuit Dome, so neutral court game here, but UCLA, they do find themselves as 2.5 to 3 point underdogs within their home city of Los Angeles, and total on this game, you're going to be getting at it a 154.5 and semi-total 155.5. I do like the over. For UCLA, it does look like they're going to be playing a little bit more of a higher octane offensive style this season. You do have a lot of guys that returned from a season ago, and The Daily Show and Eric Daly along Tyler Bilodeau. Both of these guys stand 6'7" or taller. Both of these guys were high 33 point shooters from a season ago. And for UCLA, they're probably going to be bumping up that tempo a little bit more because they now have Donovan Dent in the fold. And for Donovan Dent, he was in the first 2 games of the season, giving the team 33 points per contest, and was one of the best facilitators in all of college basketball when he was over at New Mexico last season. And when he was over at New Mexico, that was also one of the top defensive teams in all of college basketball as well. And he is going to play in this game after he was out for the previous game for UCLA. UCLA. That was a game where West Georgia actually gave them a relatively good half before UCLA pulled away. But, UCLA has yet to be able to cover any of their first 3 games of the season. It's been a little bit underwhelming for a team that retained so much from a season ago. They do bring back a guy like a Sky Clark, and you've had Jamar Brown coming to the fold, and he's been a really nice add for them as well. But for Arizona, Koa Pete has been one of the main attractions in all of college basketball. We were talking about great freshmen in the previous segment with our good friend Nate Hornung, and Koa Pete putting up 30 points night number 1 against Florida was rock solid, and that was obviously a high-scoring expose. But since that game, Arizona's tightened up the screws on defense, holding Utah Tech, a relatively up-tempo team, to 67 points, and then Northern Arizona scored just 49 in the previous game. Now, I do think that things are going to be a little bit more up and down here, as you've got a very efficient backcourt, as I think that the loss of Caleb Love is actually an addition for this Arizona team, because Love could shoot you into a game, but boy, oh boy, could that guy shoot you out of a game. And now you've got Jaden Bradley, who's able to give you 16 points per contest, has never been an explosive three-point shooter, but Anthony De La Rosa last year was a 41% three-point shooter. He's been able to play really nice off the ball. You know that you're going to be able to get good post play with Toby Awaka back after he gave you 6+ rebounds per game, and Mateo Vescrivas, he was limited due to injury last season. He's been giving the team 2 blocks, 8 points, 6 boards, not like an offensive wizard or anything like that, but you've got a lot of guys with size. You've got a lot of versatility with his team. Braden Burris, as a freshman, has been rock solid. I do think that Arizona, even though this game is being played in the state of California, they find a way to be able to get the job done. I do think that this game, close enough for late game following as well, so I did set a total of a 155.5. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the over, and with this UCLA bunch, I set them as a 3.5 point dog, so at 3 or less, I'm going to be willing to lay with Arizona. 881, 882 on the board. It is Cal Baptist, and they're going to be playing us Western Illinois. Western Illinois is a pretty good size underdog here. You're going to be catching 12.5 points with them. 143.5 is the total, and with Western Illinois, set them as a 14-point dog. So here at the 12.5, I'm going to be willing to lay with Cal Baptist. Cal Baptist's biggest bugaboo last season was their 3-point shooting. They were outside the top 270 with regards to their 3-point shooting percentage, but you retain your main guy from a season ago, Dominique Daniels, who was averaging 20 points per contest. His 3-point shooting has always been a little bit hit or miss, but this is how you do it. You bring back Martell Williams. Williams last season, he was a relatively solid 37% 3-point shooter, 9 points, not really going to give you a lot in terms of facilitation or anything like that, a little bit more of a one-trick pony, but you don't need him to do much else because you've got Brady Henjai, who's a true 7-footer that's able to give you a little bit of size down low. They've been able to get some good versatility as well as Jonathan Grayman, who he last season was someone that was not able to get out there on the floor too much. He's a international man of mystery, began his life out there actually in Venezuela, and he was part of like the NBA Global program, so he's a guy that has a little bit to his game as well, and I do like the fact that Cal Baptist has been able to do a really good job in terms of just being able to pile up offensive rebounds with Henjai, being able to control things down low. And for this Cal Baptist team, right now they're shooting 39% from 3. I think that they're doing for a little bit of regression there. And you do have a Western Illinois team that last year was actually a top 30 team in terms of their road 3-point shooting percentage, but you do lose someone like a Ryan Myers from a season ago who's a nice double-figure scorer. They're right now in a lot of transition with regards to their backcourt, and they have yet to find that guy that's going to be able to dole it out. I would think that Tyron Cook will be taking the onus on this. He was over at VMI a few seasons ago where he doled out 2.5 assists, 12.5 points, shot 34% from 3-point range, but right now it's just a little bit of a rudderless offense. You've got a guy in Isaiah Griffin who's a starter over at Idaho State. He's doing a nice job of being able to grab some boards, but for Western Illinois, right now they're losing the turnover battle on average, 14 turnovers for them, 9 for their opponents, as they don't necessarily apply a lot of ball pressure. When this team was really rolling 2 seasons ago, it was because they were doing a good job on the glass, and Griffin should be able to help out with that. And then you've got Francis Nwakosa, who comes on over from the great state of Georgia. He's been able to give you about 5 rebounds per game, but having to go up against Henjai Company, having all that travel going from the great state of Illinois on over to California, I do think that it's going to take it out of them, and I do think that in the end, it is Cal Baptist who is going to be able to get the job done, and I do think that there's going to be a lot of clean possessions here for Cal Baptist, so it is a total that I did set at a 144, recognized at Western Illinois, typically outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game, but that said, I'm going to be willing to take a shot here on the over, and want to lay with Cal Baptist. 883, 884 on the card. Gonzaga is on the road against Arizona State. Arizona State, a 12 to 12.5 point home underdog, and your total is between 161.5 to a 162.5, and set a total of a 163.5. I do like the over for Gonzaga. They're actually averaging more points per possession this year than they did a season ago. Now they're like 40th right now in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. That's because we've had a few teams just have outlier performances in their first game or two of the season. When it's all said and done, Gonzaga is going to be a top 15 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, especially with having Graham Ike back in the fold, who's been giving you an average of a double-double, 17 plus points, 7 plus rebounds per game. He was in Mark Few's doghouse a little bit last season, but was one of the most efficient players in all of college basketball. You expect absolutely nothing less than that. And then Braden Huff felt like he was a forgotten man because you're bringing Ty Grant Foster with all of his versatility, and he was great over at Grand Canyon last year. 15 plus points, 6 plus boards. Really didn't shoot it well from three, but he'll give you a block, a steal per game. He'll do a little bit of everything like that. Mario Sansupri, who comes on over from Spain, has been rock solid. And then the out of sight, out of mind guys, Seal Ventures, Jalen Worley, after they didn't play last year, throwing their Braden Smith as well. Those are all guys that they capture the attention. But Huff is a guy that at 6'10", he's able to do a nice job in terms of giving you some versatility, in terms of popping it from three. He'll give you 5 plus rebounds per game. That said, I set Arizona State as only a 7.5 point underdog because this is going to be the first true road game for Gonzaga this year. I know that they played two very good teams in Oklahoma along with Creighton, but both of those games were at the Kennel. Now you have to go to Arizona State where you've got the shadow of distraction and everything like that, and Arizona State does look a little bit improved this year. They brought in a guy, Mo Odom, that I liked. He was over at Pepperdine and Pacific. At both stops, he was averaging 5 plus assists per contest. He's right now doing a good, clean offense for Arizona State. Now, recognize that Arizona State in their first 2 games of the season, they face off against Utah Tech and Southern Utah. So they had the Battle of Utahs in there, but that said, Moussamba Diop is a 7'1" freshman that comes in from Senegal, and he has been rock solid for the team, and he should be able to help them out down low against Graham Ike. Does Ike still win that battle? Most likely, but you've also got Alan David McCabe, who he was pretty rock solid over at Oakland last year, 14.5 points, 7.5 boards, a little bit of a block per contest. Not a guy that's going to take the top off of a defense and shoot it from three, and they probably want to get a little bit of revenge on Adam Miller, who was a 40% three-point shooter for them last season. He decided to transfer out of the program, and then they brought in the non-Division I transfer, and Anthony Johnson was one of the best non-D1 guys in all of college basketball last season. He's been able to give the team 24 points in the first 2 games of the season. I do think that Gonzaga finds a way to be able to get the job done, but I think that this will be a single-digit game, and keep in mind, Arizona State last year actually did give Gonzaga a very good battle out there in the state of Washington, so I set my line at 7.5. I'm willing to take the points with Arizona State. I did set my total at 163.5. I do think that you get a relatively up and down game. It does appear as though Arizona State is going to be looking to run a little bit, so I'm going to be in on that over, and I'm going to be willing to take the points with the Sun Devils. 885, 886 on the card. Washington is on the road against Washington State. Washington State, a home underdog of pretty good size, 9.5 point home underdog. So on this game, it is 160.5, and I'm going to be willing to take those points with Washington State. Set them as a 6 point underdog. Now, I recognize that to begin the year, the losses against Idaho along with Davidson, they were less than savory, but for Washington State, really nice win a few nights ago as they were able to do a good job lambasting a St. Thomas team that I actually do think has quite a bit of upside. And David Riley, I think, is just a good young coach that it seems they always like to play frenetically. They're always in the top 50 in terms of total possessions per game going back to his time over at Eastern Washington, and he's had his team just deal with a little bit of bad shooting variance. Right now, his Washington State team shooting less than 30% from three, and his opponents shooting 40.7% from three-point range. That should all iron out when it's all said and done. And you've got Thomas Sorensen, who he last season saw some minutes towards back half of the season with all the injuries that Washington State dealt with, and right now he's giving you 15 points, shooting in the high 30s from three-point range. And Emmanuel Ugbo, who comes on over from Boise State, he at 6'8", has given great versatility, shooting over 40% from three, 15 points, 6 boards per contest. I really like what he's able to bring to the table, and they're going to need that versatility because for Washington, no longer is it Great Osabor and absolutely nothing else. They spread the wealth in the transfer portal, and they brought in a pair of guys that were great teammates with one another over at USC and Desmond Claude along Wesley Yates. Now, for Desmond Claude, it's been a case where he's been dealing with injury. He returned to practice, but it was a non-contact sort of return, so if he does play, he's probably going to be very limited in this game. Now, you've got Hans Steinbeck, who at 6'11", he comes over from the country of Germany, and he has been in the first 3 games he's played at Dominator. 14.5 points, 12.5 boards, 3.5 assists. He has taken 1 3, and he made the 1 3 that he took. He's not really going to take a ton of those, so you're going to be looking a little bit more to Kamari Peterson, who's already taken 24 threes this far this season, so the Petersons are not afraid to shoot their shot. You've got him coming on over from ETSU, where he shot 42% from 3, 19.5 points per contest, and then Jacob Ogunsevich, he's a guy that comes on over after he last season was a star player over at Lipscomb, but we have yet to see him out there on the floor either. Zoom Diallo always is suspect with his three-point shooting, but he helps be able to dole out the offense a little bit more. But with Washington State facing off against a Huskies team that they're right now a little bit short-handed, they're still without Brandon Roy Jr. as well. You all know that name. I do think that they do a solid job of being able to hold in there, recognize that they're going to have a little bit of a tough time on the glass, but I do think that this turns into a bit more of an up-and-down game. I do think that with the sloppiness of Washington State, last year they were outside the top 300 in terms of ball security. That does just enough to keep you under. So my total at a 158, so at the 160.5, like the under, but won't take those points with the Cougars. This is the last game on the normal Las Vegas betting board before we have the extra games. 887, 888. Manhattan is on the road against Hawaii. Rainbow Warriors are 13 to 14 point favorites. So this game, it is 155.5, and give me the points with the Manhattan Jaspers. I set them as an 8.5 point underdog for why they last year were outside the top 225 in terms of total possessions per game, and we have seen Hawaii be pretty explosive with their offense on the island. First game of the season, that was a 60 to 59 slog against Oregon. I think that they're going to get back to their roots of playing a little bit more defense oriented. They did a nice job holding down Mississippi Valley State a few nights ago, but we all know that Mississippi Valley State is the most sorry team in all of college basketball. But you've got Isaac Johnson, a true 7-footer that was seeing some starts a few seasons ago over at Utah State. He's been able to pull in their 9.5 rebounds per game, and you bring back the top scorer from a season ago, Yatis Namishka. He was over at Xavier to begin his career. Last year, 12 points on about 32% three-point shooting, 5.5 boards per contest at 6'7". He's able to do a little bit of this and that, and Hawaii doesn't look improved with their three-point shooting. They bring in Quandre Bullock along with Hunter Erickson. Erickson spent some time at BYU and Utah, and actually saw some starts at BYU, so he's helping facilitate good, clean offense. And then we've got a guy in Bullock who last season over at South Dakota, 12 points per contest, but not necessarily a guy that's going to be a super explosive three-point shooter, though Harry Ruyev, he's got some relatively good versatility in his game. And then with the Jaspers, they are currently without Will Sindner. He's dealing with some eligibility issues. He was probably their top scorer returning from a season ago, but it's night at the Roxborough. Fraser Roxborough, who at 6'7" last year was shooting 48% from three, was limited to only half the season due to injury. He's back. He's been able to give this team some nice outside shooting. You've got Jaden Winston along Terrence Jones in this backcourt as well. Jones is a guy that began his career over at Norfolk State, and he was over there a nice ancillary scorer, was able to give the team 6 points, 3 boards. Has never really been a super three-point shooter. Right now shooting over 50% per three. That's going to see some regression, but Jaden Winston, he does a nice job in terms of just being able to keep the offense online. He's in his third year starting at the point guard spot. Last year, 4.5 assists, 2 steals, 9 points per contest. Again, not a great three-point shooter, so I do think that Manhattan is going to be a little bit limited with that regard. That's a big reason why I did set a total here of a 146.5. I'm going to be one thing shot on the under, but I think that Manhattan does a rock-solid job of holding in there. They're going to be at a little bit of a disadvantage on the glass. Hawaii last year, top 25 team in terms of rebound percentage, but Mario Lubicic, who comes over from Croatia, has been able to give you 6 rebounds per game. We have seen Anthony Isaac at 6'6" be able to give you some boards as well. I think that this Manhattan team holds in there, and they're being undervalued with the injury right now to Sindner being taken into account a little bit too much. So I'm going to take the points here with Manhattan, and I'm going to be in on the under. Now we hit the extra games.
The normal betting board picks are complete, but there are some extra games today, so we go into the bonus.
306-621, 306-622. Central Michigan and Coppin St are doing battle out there on a neutral court. This is from the great state of Florida, and Central Michigan, a 10.5 point favorite. Total on this game is 142.5, and I said Central Michigan as a 14.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number for Central Michigan. Spirited effort yesterday against South Alabama. They are going to be having to deal with a back-to-back, and you've got a fresh Coppin State team, but I don't think that that's going to do a lot for Coppin State. Coppin State was 363rd out of 364 teams in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and I think they're a little bit better with their offense than they were a season ago, but still, right now, you don't have a single player that's averaging more than 9 points per contest. Khalil Horton and Tyler Koenig, they've been your main scorers. You do have a guy in DeMonterry Hall who is a nice non-Division I guy that comes on over, but they're really lackluster there. Their main guy, Jonathan Dunn, from a season ago, he decided to transfer within the conference over at NC Central, and right now you've only got 2 guys pulling in there more than 3.3 rebounds per game. Coppin State really doesn't do a whole heck of a lot right. They're shooting less than 30% from three-point range. You're getting plowed on the glass. They're turning the ball over 18 times per contest, and Central Michigan, under the tutelage of Andy Brocknema, I think that they're going to be playing a little bit more tempo than they did in that game yesterday against South Alabama. South Alabama has an uncanny way to be able to play things a little bit more slow and controlled, and we saw the Central Michigan team. I recognize it was ranked number 1, but they hung 82 on the board against Appalachian State, so I do think that they're going to do a lot of damage all by themselves for this total. I do like the over as Fat Brooks, who comes on over from Michigan. He's got a little bit of upside in the backcourt, has not necessarily been an explosive scorer thus far, but I think that Rodney Johnson is the key, as he was over at Tennessee Tech last year, was giving that team 13 points, shot 40% from 3, 6 boards per contest. A little bit silent here in the first few games of the season. I think that he's going to be able to find his footing a little bit more with regards to this offense. And then additionally, a guy that comes on up from the 91 ranks along with Brocknema, Tamario Adley. He's been able to do a nice job in terms of giving this team double figures. He's helping lead the offense. This team is still in a little bit of search for that point guard spot, but what better way to be able to find that than against Coppin State? So this is a circumstance where I'm going to be willing to take a shot here on the over. I did set my total at a 144.5. Recognize that with these early games, the legs are not necessarily under you with regards to 3-point shooting, but I think that this Central Michigan team is going to do a nice job of just driving to the rim and get this done all by themselves. So I do like the over, and I'm willing to lay up to 14 with Central Michigan, 3-6-6-23, 3-6-6-24. You've got Lindenwood and Charleston Southern. This is going to be another neutral court game from Alabama A&M's University, and for Lindenwood, they are a 3.5 to a 4-point underdog. Total on this game is 158.5, and with Lindenwood, I made them the 3-point favorite. I like them outright on the money line. Charleston Southern is coming off of a relatively rough back-to-back here. I recognize that Lindenwood is not necessarily a team that's going to wow you, especially with their 3-point shooting, as for Lindenwood last year, out of 364 Division I teams, they were 364th in terms of their 3-point shooting percentage, so that was very much less than savory, to say the least. But that said, you do return quite a few guys from a season ago that were able to do a good job of being a top 100 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. You've got back Jadis Jones, who was able to give you 12 plus points, 5 plus rebounds per game, and I like the addition of Mekhi Cooper. Cooper last year was over at Miami of Ohio, where he supplied that team with about 6 points, 2.5 assists, shot 39% from 3-point. That's the sort of leadership that this team needed, and we have noticed with Lindenwood in their first few years at the Division I level, they've had like 1 or 2 star players and then not a lot of depth. You've got a little bit more depth, as you've got Enos Futrell, who he was dealing with a little bit of injury to begin the season. He's back. He's been able to get the team 13 points per contest in his first 2 games last season over at Lindenwood. 13 points. He was able to supply 6 boards, steal and a half per contest. Like what he's able to bring to the table. And then I think that Jeremiah Tolton is a little bit of an upside guy as well. 7 points, shot 37.5% from 3-point. One of the few guys that could really throw it in there from 3-point. And Charleston Southern just was not great at taking care of the ball last year. Outside the top 320 in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis. Now, the fact that they bring back Alan Sumler is very big. 2 years ago, he was giving the team double figures. He missed all of last year due to injury, and they have upped their game down low. Bringing in the Bradford brothers is very big, though. You got one of them out of the fold. Nate Bradford, he's been coming in off the bench. He was the one that was over at Georgia Southern last year. Meanwhile, his brother Devin Bradford, who was over at Siena, he's right now dealing with a little bit of injury, but Nate Bradford is able to give you a block per contest. He elevates his team down low. Reese Jones is a guy that's able to give you over 5 rebounds per game. In the game yesterday, he had a double-double, so he's been pretty rock solid, though they refuse to put him in the starting lineup. But again, I do think that this back-to-back spot is really going to be hurting this Charleston Southern team, and I think as a result, you get a little bit of a slower game. Lindenwood, a relatively mid-tempo team. Charleston Southern, it looks like this year they're wanting to run, but semi-total 149. I like the under, and I like Lindenwood outright on the money line. I set them as a 3-point favorite. 306-625, 306-626. You've got Rutgers playing us to Lehigh. Lehigh is an underdog of 17.5 points. Total on this game open up at a 143.5. We're down to a 140.5, and I landed between A and B. I set my total at 141.5, so now that we're getting a 140.5, I'm in on the over with regards to this Lehigh team. Just not a bunch that is doing a great job of giving themselves second and third chances on offense outside the top 340 in terms of their offensive rebound percentage last season. I don't see this really going northward. Hank Alvey, he's back from a season ago after he was able to do a solid job giving the team like 7 points, 5 rebounds per game. Saw a few more minutes than expected out of necessity because they dealt with so many injuries last year, as really Nasir Whitlock and Joshua Ingram are your 2 guys that are back from the backcourt. With Ingram last year, part-time starter, 7 points per contest, shot 36% from 3-point, and Nasir Whitlock was averaging very good numbers in Patriot League play last year. Overall, 10.5 points per contest, shot 36.5% from 3. That went up to 13.5 points per contest in Patriot League play, but and really other than Alvey, you don't have a ton of size with this team. And Rutgers is back to playing grimy and just really defense-oriented basketball. That's what they did prior to last year when you had the 2 NBA draft picks in the fold and Ace Bailey along with Dylan Harper, and now they're back to this Steve Pikiell style where they're always one of the better defenses in all of college basketball. 2 years ago, they were outside the top 200 in terms of total possessions per game. They're playing relatively slowly once again as Tariq Francis, who comes over from NJIT, he's been the main scorer. First 2 games, he's been able to supply the team with 32 points. Last year at NJIT was averaging about 15 to 16 points per contest, and you've been able to get some relatively good rebounding down low out of Dylan Grant. He's one of the main holdovers from a season ago. Last year, he gave the team like 6 points, 3.5 rebounds per game, was lost in the shadow of the NBA draft picks, and he was limited due to injury as well. But you've also been able to get a guy that has been able to come in, and Emmanuel Ogmale, who's saying 6'10". He's been able to give you some relatively good size. He's been giving you a ton of rebounds after last season. He was another guy that was a little bit of an afterthought, would see some starts, but was only giving the team like 13, 14 minutes per contest. I like the way that Jermichael Davis has really been able to step up as well. He's one of those main holdovers from a season ago where last season about 5 points per contest. contest, mid-30s three-point shooter, and he's been able to elevate there. I think that Rutgers is doing a nice job getting back to their roots. I do think that with Lehigh, they're going to be able to hold up a little bit more in the backcourt. They're going to get bludgeoned down low. I did set my line at a 17.5. Right now I'm seeing one or two stray 17s out there. I'd be willing to lay up to a 17 with Rutgers, and at a 141 or less, I'm in on the over. 306-627, 306-620. Louisiana is on the road against McNeese, and McNeese finds themselves as a pretty good-sized favorite. You're going to be laying with them anywhere between 10 to 10.5 points total on this game, between 134.5 to a 135.5. This opened up at a 138.5 with the total, and we have noticed that Louisiana currently outside the top 3 in terms of total possessions per game. Very shocking that you got a new coach and they're actually looking to slow down. That's what Quantis White has been doing with this Louisiana team, despite the fact that they actually bring in a top 100 freshman in Joshua Lewis, who's had the handcuffs on him a little bit to begin the season. Not going to lie, he's been only able to give the team about 4.5 points per contest, so we'll see if he's able to elevate a little bit more moving forward, but he's honestly had the impact that a lot of people were expecting. That said, you do have a guy in Jackson Alvera who has come in and he's been absolutely tremendous for the team. He's been able to supply this unit with 17 points, 5 rebounds. He's from three-point range, not a guy that's going to completely light you up from the outside. Typically last year at Pepperdine was shooting 33% from 3. Small sample size thus far, shooting about 43% from 3-point range, but do think that that's going to be going downward a little bit. But that said, with this McNeese team, I did set them as more of an 8.5 point favorite because I do think that what is going to be able to keep Louisiana lively in this game is what they've been able to do. In terms of these guys that only stand like 6'5", 6'6", in terms of being able to pound the glass, as you've got Dorian Finster, who began his career over at Kansas State. He's been able to do a rock-solid job after last season. He had Sam Houston State, was able to give that team 8 points, 6 boards, a little bit under a steal per contest. I love what he's able to bring to just the system in general. And then Darius Woodson is a guy that's been around the block. He was over at North Dakota State last season, 8.5 points, 2.5 boards. He's a guy that was shooting in the low 30s from 3-point range, but has some size and some stretchability. And for McNeese, it is a new look team under Bill Armstrong. You did have 1 or 2 holdovers from the Will Wade era, as they've been getting good contributions out of DJ Turn It Up Richards. He last season was a over 40% 3-point shooter that gave you 8 plus points per contest. And then Javon Garcia last year, I knew he was a starter, and he was a bonus at fight stud for this team. 12.5 points, 3.5 boards, a steal and a half per contest, career 37% 3-point shooter. But you do have a lot of new, what are you going to be able to get moving forward out of someone like a Gawari Duel, who's a former top 45 recruit. He's been really the main facilitator with a little bit over 5 assists per contest. Tyson Archie, I like the fact that he comes in from Tulsa after last season. He supplied that team with 9.5 points, was able to dish out a pair of assists. Not a guy that's going to really give you a ton from 3-point range. McNeese last year was a pretty slow and controlled team. They were outside the top 3 in terms of total possessions per game, and this is very much warped by the fact that they have played a non-Division I team in College of Bible Studies, and they scored 132 points there, and then Champion Christian, they scored 127 points there, but they're averaging well over 100 points per game this season. You look at their one Division I game, they lost to Santa Clara 79-67. That's a pretty up-tempo Santa Clara team, but I do think that under the tutelage of Bill Armstrong, who comes on over from Bradley, that they are going to be looking to push a little bit more tempo. So I did set a little bit of a higher total here. I did set mine at a 144.5. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on this total over, but that said, I'm also willing to take the points here with Louisiana and their new look style and the way that they've been able to glass. So going to be willing to take a shot on the points and the over. 306-629, 306-630. Rhode Island plays host to Albany, and Albany is a pretty sizable underdog here. You're going to be catching 13.5 points with them. 115.5 to 151.5 is the total. I did set my total 156.5. I do like the over for Albany. They've just been a little bit all over the place ever since Dwayne Killings took over as the coach. Like in the first year or two for Albany, they were one of the slowest teams in all of college basketball. Then they sped things up. Last year, they were more of a mid-tempo team. Just really hard to be able to get a gauge for these guys, and they've got a lot of moving parts. They bring in Iffy West Ingram, who was over at Rider last year. He was giving that team about 4 rebounds per contest. And Nasir Muhammad, he was a pretty solid scorer last year over at Northern Illinois. 7.5 points, part-time starter, shot about 35% from 3-point range. So a little bit of upside there, but you pretty much lose 5 out of your top 6 scorers from a season ago, and you're relying upon Yaya Kita, great name, who was over at Missouri and Oklahoma at 6'8" to give you some size, but he hasn't been able to get out there on the floor too much. Only about 12 minutes per contest, so this team is leaving something to be desired on the glass. And with Rhode Island, I do not think that our good friend and Archie Miller is doing a great job as coach, but I do think that they should be able to win that battle down low with bringing in Muhammad. So, at 6'9" last season over at St. Peter's, gave the team 5+ rebounds per game. Keenan Itajeri, who was over at Northern Kentucky 8 seasons ago, 7.5 points. He's able to throw in there 5.5 boards. Not someone that's really going to be spacing the floor, and losing David Green from last season is rough, but I like that backcourt of Jonah Hinton along Tyler Cochran. These two guys are combining to average 31 points per contest. Go back 2 years ago to when Cochran was over at Toledo. He was averaging 14 points per game, shooting in the high 30s from three. He does a good job of giving you some rebounds. And for Cochran, in the first 3 games of the season, he's generated 16 steals. I don't think that he's going to quite be able to continue that, but this is a team that it looks like they're trying to generate a few more turnovers for this Rhode Island team through their first 3 games of the season. They're averaging over 18 turnovers generated per contest. 3-point shooting has been leaving a bit of something to be desired. I do think that that's going to elevate, especially with RJ Johnson coming over after he had Charleston Southern last year, gave that team 14 points, 4.5 assists, career about 34% 3-point shooter. I do think that the pieces are going to start to come together for this Rhode Island team against an Albany team that they've got a very fresh new look backcourt, and just don't think the world of Dwayne Killings as a coach. I really don't think the world of either of these guys as a coach, and I do think that Rhode Island going to be looking to push that tempo after they were a top 100 team in terms of total possessions per game last year. I think that the turnovers lead to fast break layups. So I did set my total 156.5, like the over, and I'm willing to lay up to 16 here with Rhode Island. 36-631, 36-632. West Georgia plays host to the Citadel, and Citadel finds themselves as 4.5 to 5.5 point underdogs. Tallest game, it is 146.5, and it's at West Georgia's 7-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. With the Citadel, the good news is they do bring back quite a few of their guys from last year. The bad news is, for the Citadel, they were outside the top 340 in terms of 3-point shooting percentage, well outside the top 320 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and I just don't think Ed Conroy's a very good coach. Like, he couldn't cut it at Tulane. He was okay in his first go-around over at the Citadel, and he's pretty much here at the Citadel because they can't find anyone else to coach his team, but they've only got one guy that's been able to do a solid job for them down low, Sola Abbasi, who right now has given the team 7.5 rebounds per game this season after last year, 6 boards, 9 points per contest. He was a solid starter, and he tried to shoot some threes. He only shot 29% from 3-point range. Christian Moore is giving them more. He's up to about 15 points per contest after last year as a part-time starter, 32.5% 3-point shooter, 8.5 points per contest. I mean, that's going to cut it for this team, but I mean, there is just a lot left to be desired by this team, as they are currently a bunch that has been taking care of the ball in the first few games of the season, but they're not generating any turnovers on defense. They have themselves been giving it up really down low. They are outside the top 325 in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage, and for the Citadel, ever since Ed Conroy has taken over, they've been outside the top 270 in terms of total possessions per game, and they faced off against a West Georgia team that should be able to win that battle down low with Sheldon Williams. Dryden back from season ago last year, 15 plus points, 7 plus rebounds per game, and it was a West Georgia team going in transition from the D2 ranks to the D1 level last year, and they did bring back a few guys that are rock solid, like a Colton Griffin, who last year was able to supply about 9 points, 4 boards, pair of assists, not necessarily a great 3-point shooter, and this is a West Georgia team that last year left a lot to be desired with their 3-point shooting. They're currently shooting 40% from 3-point range this season. Do think that that's going to be going downward as Josh Smith, he's right now shooting over 46% from 3-point range. Comes in from NC Central, where last year shot more around 37.5% from 3-point range, 9 points, an assist and a half per contest. I think that he's going to be going back to that level a little bit more, but this is clearly an improved backcourt after last season. They had just a lot of shakiness with that regard, and now you've got a little bit more of a primary ball handler in Chaz Lulis, who he comes on over from San Diego. Last year, he had a tough time getting out there on the floor, but a relatively highly touted guy coming out of the state of Michigan. He's been able to do a nice job being able to give this team a little bit of security there, and I do think that with this West Georgia team, the way that they did hold in there against Nebraska and UCLA, they were down 5 points or fewer at the half in both of those games. They let go of the rope in the second half. I do think that they take it to a Citadel team that I'm just not impressed with whatsoever. I set my total at 142. I'm in on the under. West Georgia, relatively low-tempo team last season, and I'm going to be willing to lay up to 9.5 with them. 306-633, 306-634. South Carolina State is on the road. They're facing off against Charleston. Charleston does find themselves as favorites of 14.5 points. Total is 158.5. I did set Charleston as a 15-point favorite. I don't want to go past the 14.5, but I'm going to be willing to lay it here, and mainly because with Charleston, they are dealing with a lot of injury right now, or else they would be well above a 20-point favorite right now. But for Charleston, right now, they are without a guy that I really liked when he was over at Bradley 2 seasons ago in Connor Hickman. He was averaging 15 points per contest there. Kobe Duggan, when it came to CAA conference play, was averaging 18 plus points per contest over at Campbell. You also have Mr. Dean, first name Mr., last name Dean, 15 plus point per game score over at USC Upstate. Bryce Baker, who's over at Winthrop, is right now dealing with injury. So, they're just going through a big giant whatchamado there. But the freshman and Chris Davis, he's been pretty rock solid coming in from the great state of Wisconsin. He's been able to get the team 10 points per contest. And even with all the injuries, this is a Charleston team that they're not going to be shy of taking the threes. Now, they are shooting less than 30% from the outside. I do think that that's going to be going northward as Martin Kalu, who is not expected to be seeing a lot of playing time, 6'6" combo player, comes in from Germany. He's been able to give you about 14.5 points. He's right now shooting 50% from 3-point range. And this should still be a squad that wins a battle down low because you've got Joel Macho, who he's come in. He's been able to give the team as a true 7-footer a little bit over 7 rebounds per game. There's just no way that South Carolina State is going to be able to match up with that. South Carolina State had a pretty rock-solid defensive team 8 seasons ago, but they lose all those pieces, including Drayton Jones, who he decided to go up the power conference level in the offseason. Right now, you're relying upon a bunch of guys that are like 6'5", 6'6", to provide some versatility. Really, the lone guy in the rotation that is seeing good minutes that's above 6'6" is James Murrow. He last season was more of an ancillary guy that only gave the team about 2.5 points per contest. He's capable of being a pop it a little bit from 3, but he doesn't necessarily pop it well. And then you've got Florent Teneby. He's one of the few guys that saw meaningful minutes last year that is back as well. Last year, part-time starter, 4 points per contest, shot in the mid-30s from 3-point range, so really doesn't give you a ton there. This team is right now searching for their main point guard. It looks like Jaden Johnson is going to be taking over the reins there after he was a part-time starter for the team last season, 2.5 assists, 5 points per contest, but losing Michael Teal is relatively rough there. They replaced so much from a team that have a lot going for them when they were making their high-key style line changes. They had a lot of depth. They're trying to duplicate that, but they've got a lot of unproven guys that they're trying to do it with. I think that Charleston, they lay it on them. And South Carolina State, always an up-tempo team in the top 50 in terms of total possessions per game. So set a 163 total, like the over, and I'm going to be one lay it with Charleston, 36-635, 36-636. Hofstra's on the road against Bucknell. The bracket Boston Bison are a home underdog of 1.5 points, 139.5 is the total, and I said Hofstra is a 2.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the 1.5. Now, Hofstra's in a little bit of transition in the backcourt with losing Gene Amarujan from a season ago, but they returned the Cruz Davis, who last season he was a very rock-solid double-figure scorer from 3-point range. He was launching at a 39% clip, giving out 4.5 assists per game, and he's picking up right where he left out from the season ago. 18 points, 6 boards, 5 assists here in the first 3 games of the season. Love his game. The question is, what are you going to be able to get around the Cruz? As Preston Eadman has been able to supply you with about 15 points per contest. Silas Sunday is a true 7-footer who hasn't necessarily lived up to his potential. He's been able to give the team 4 rebounds per game. He's got big shoes to fill because when they had James Graham down low a season ago, they were actually number 1 in all of college basketball in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. They were a relatively slow and controlled team, and it looks like under Speedy Claxton, they're once again going to be a little bit more controlled, and John Griffin has been cranking up the Bison. Last year, they were in the upper half of all of college basketball in terms of total possessions per game. They do have to replace, though, 4 of their top 5 scorers from a season ago as Rui Bijak. He's one of your main guys that are back from a season ago. Last year, 8.5 points per contest, shot in the mid-30s from 3-point range. So you like what he's able to bring to the table. And Brandon McCreesh, he's going to have a big role in the backcourt as well after he last year was able to shoot about 41.5% from 3-point range on relatively low volume, but gave the team 6 points per game. But you lose that true 7-footer and Noah Williamson that allowed them to be able to dominate games. He was also popping it from 3-point range as well. So that means that Archelaus Sedone, along with Amarian Doris, need to step up. And Doris, he has a true freshman, 6'11" big man that comes in from Germany. He's been great. He's been able to give the team 15.5 points per contest. Not quite the versatility that Williamson provided, but he's still popping a few threes himself. But it's a team that just doesn't necessarily have a lot of depth right now. Quentin Berger, who came on over from St. Joe's, never really was able to take off. And I do think that with Cruz on the other side, that Hofstra wins this game with the backcourt. And I do think that this is going to be a game that has a fair amount of possessions and comes down to late game felling. Set my line at 2.5. I'm going to be willing to lay with Hofstra, and somebody told 144.5. I'm going to be in on the over. 306-637, 306-638. Towson plays us in Norfolk St. Norfolk State, an underdog of 10 to 10.5 points with a total of 136.5. Set Towson as a 10-point favorite. Once you get above the 10, that is my buy point on Norfolk State. Now, Towson, just an incredible defense. Last year in the top 40 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and they gave a relatively good fight to Houston. I recognize that losing that game by 17 doesn't sound impressive, but they went on the road. They battled Houston tough for a little bit over 35 minutes, and they returned so much of that backcourt from a season ago. Dylan Williamson was able to give that team 13 plus points per contest. Tyler Tejada was a nice double-figure scorer as well. There's reason to believe that Towson's going to be a little bit better on offense this season while being able to maintain that good defensive-oriented style. Now, they did lose a few of their forwards from a season ago, but adding in there Jack Dombia, who actually began his career over at Norfolk State last year at Wright State, 11.5 points, 5.5 boards, good versatility with being able to give the team a steal per contest, a little bit over a 30% three-point shooter at 6'6". I think that that's going to be big. And Norfolk State last year was well outside the top 200 in terms of opponents' three-point shooting percentage. Robert Jones's team was just not as great on defense as you'd expect, but they are trying to restore the roar with Anthony McComb coming over after he last season over at New Hampshire was a very rock-solid piece. 13 points, trio of boards, not necessarily a great three-point shooter. Has shot for his career less than 30% from 3, but having Elijah Jamison, who 2 seasons ago over at UW Milwaukee was a north of 8-point per game scorer. That's big. And Devin Ellis, who was over at Maryland Eastern Shore for a while. Last year at Valparaiso, he was more of a role player with about 5 points per contest, but go back to what he was able to do over at Eastern Shore, 11.5 points, 4.5 boards within the MEAC. He should be able to give this team some versatility at 6'6", but it's a very undersized team. Like, even last year, they weren't necessarily the world's greatest team on the glass. Now they really don't have a lot on the glass, as you really don't have anyone north of 6'6" other than Rodney Baines, who's seeing a lot of minutes, and he's not even seeing a lot as well. And Deion Wright-Ford has not necessarily panned out as a transfer, but I do think that his ability to be able to generate some turnovers helps his team hang in there. I think that you're going to get a little bit more moving forward out of Jackwell Morris, who has spent some time at Miami of Ohio and St. Peter's. 2 years ago as a part-time starter over at Miami of Ohio, was able to supply that team with 4 boards, a block per contest, and I think that that's just enough to hold in there against the Tarleton team that is very slow, very defense-oriented, and I do think that this is going to be a bit of a slog of a game. As a result, I did set my total at 134. I'm in on the under, and I am going to be willing to take anything above 10 points here with Norfolk State. 306-639, 306-640. You've got Stonehill, and they are going to be on the road against Fairfield, and the Stags of Fairfield are a mid-tier favorite, anywhere between 7 to 7.5 points. 145.5 is the total, and I set my line at 7.5. So at a 7 or less, I'm going to be willing to lay it with the Stags. With Fairfield, they did a nice job holding in their night number 1 against Penn State. I recognize that Penn State is way down this season, but for this bunch, they're in a little bit of transition after they did lose their top scorer from a season ago in Prophet Johnson, but I love the way that they hit the transfer portal. They bring in a guy in the Deuce Turner down for what? Who he last season, when he was over at UC Santa Barbara, he was able to give that team 9.5 points per contest, and over at San Diego, he was averaging 15.5 points per game. He has not even given the team anything too much right now. Like, he's only averaging 3 points per game, and I think that when he gets unleashed, that this Fairfield team is going to be able to reach another level, as right now it's a bunch of freshmen that are really stepping up for them. Brandon Benjamin, he's a freshman that comes in from the great state of New Jersey, 13.5 points, 9.5 boards per contest. You've got Brandon Sparks, who he was one of the few guys that gave the team any sort of rebounding whatsoever. Sparks last year, 9.5 points, trio of boards, pair of assists. He's a career 35% three-point shooter. He's been able to come in there. He's been able to give the team 19-plus points per contest, so like what I'm seeing there. And Isaac Mukady, who he's one of the main holdovers from a season ago, he gives the team a little bit more size at 6'10", and Sonell is going to have a tough time being able to match up with that size, especially with 6'7" Cowboy player Todd Brogna being out from a season ago. I really liked what he was able to bring to the table, so losing a guy like that I think is going to be very rough. But that said, you do retain a lot of the ancillary guards from the season ago. So you've got back Chad Stinson along with Herman Kofi. Kofi last season, about 9.5 points, 37.5% three-point shooter. And Stinson, he's able to give you a little bit of facilitation, but he's more of an off-the-ball scorer as well. And they bring in Raymond Espinal Guzman, who he was beginning his career over at Sacred Heart last season. Nice ancillary piece, was able to give the team about 5 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. He does help out a little bit on the glass, but I think that the overall size that Fairfield has brought in, the way that they've been dominating on the glass, is going to be enough to be able to get the job done, especially against a Stonehill team that they were a good three-point shooting team last year. Last year, they were shooting as a collective about 35.5% from three-point range, but they were also well outside the top 250 in terms of opponents' two-point shooting percentage. They don't do a great job in terms of pressuring the ball, so do think that Fairfield finds a way to persevere here. I did set my total at a 145.5. I'm right now seeing a straight 145. This opened up at a 144.5, so 145 or less. I'm in on the over, and I'm willing to lay up to 7 here with Fairfield. 366.41, 366.42. Tulane is playing host to New Orleans. New Orleans is a 12.5 point underdog. Total this game, it is 153.5, and I said Tulane is a 15-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. Now, New Orleans is much improved from where they were in past seasons. No longer is this like a bottom 25 team in all of college basketball. They did a nice job with Master P, now part of the organization, doing a nice job bringing in some guys via the transfer portal. Jacavion Buckley was legitimately the main point guard over at Southeast Louisiana last year, where he was giving out 4 assists, double-figure amount of points. And Colton Benson, over the last 2 seasons over at Texas State, has been a guy that's averaged just under 10 points per contest, 40% three-point shooter, 90% free throw shooter. Really, the lone guy that they retained from a season ago was MJ Thomas, as they kicked off like 3 of their top 4 scorers from the season ago. Thomas was alone over 11 points, 8 boards as a freshman, so you like that. And Hill Abis, he began his career over at DePaul and Wake Forest. Saw some okay minutes when he was at DePaul a few seasons ago. He brings his team some size at 6'10", but that said, I just don't think that they're going to be able to match up with a Tulane team that it looks like they're finally trying to go a little bit more defense-oriented under Coach Hunter. I remember Coach Hunter like 2 or 3 years ago, his teams were just way super up-tempo, and they didn't necessarily play the most deep of rotations, so it appears as though they have learned a little bit from that, as Rowan Brumbaugh is doing a tremendous job of being able to run the point. He's been able to supply the team with over 20 points per contest thus far this season. I don't know if he's necessarily going to be able to continue that, but even last year, mid-30s three-point shooter, 3+ assists, 15+ points per contest, and then you've got 6'5" Curtis Jones, who does a little bit of everything. He, over at Georgetown last year, saw a few starts. He was giving that team about 5 points per contest. He has stepped in here, and he's been able to give the team 4.5 boards, 11 points. He's shooting it really well from three. I don't know if he continues north of 55% three-point shooting, but Asher Woods is another mid-30s three-point shooter, and bringing in Scotty Middleton, who saw good minutes over at Seton Hall, over at Ohio State last 2 seasons, and is a career 41% three-point shooter. That very much fits his Tulane style. Tulane also has a big man in Davion Bradford to be able to match up with all the size that New Orleans has down low. Bradford is a true 7-footer that began his career over at Kansas State. Just a long and winding road for him. Hasn't really seen a ton of minutes, but I think that they could utilize him a little bit more in this spot. And with Tulane, I do think that they're going to be looking to push tempo against a New Orleans team that year in and year out has been outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. So did set my total at a 161. I do like the over, and I'm going to lay it with Tulane. 306-643, 306-644. High point hopes to not be a low point as they're on the road against UAB. UAB is between a 1.5 to a 2.5 point home underdog. 169.5 is the total. I set my total at 162.5. I'm in on the under. Recognize that UAB has been a up-tempo team under the tutelage of Andy Kennedy, typically in the top 50 in terms of total possessions per game. And for High Point, they stayed in-house with their coaching move in the offseason as they bring in Flynn Clayman, and it looks like he's going to be able to stay pretty true to that High Point system. And High Point was not like some sort of a super up-tempo team or anything like that. One of the most efficient offenses in all of college basketball each of the last 2 years, ranking in the top 30 in terms of points scored on a per-possession basis. But you take a look at the total possessions per game, High Point was well outside the top 225 each of the last 2 seasons. This season, they've been right around about 222nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. So they're very much staying tried and true there with High Point. They obviously had a lot of turnover, but they retained a few guys from last season's team. Chase Johnson, a nice 40% three-point shooter, is the main holdover from last season. You're bringing Rob Martin, who is a very nice scorer over at Southeast Missouri State, where he was able to supply that team with about 14 points per contest. And then they did a nice job gambling on Cameron Fletcher, who is a former top 100 recruit, spent some time at Kentucky, and last we saw him fully healthy over at Florida State during the 2021-22 season. He was a nice ancillary piece that shot 36% from three, 7 points per contest, able to give you a few boards. I like his overall game, but for UAB, they take a embarrassing loss over at Alabama State, so you know that these guys are going to be very hungry, and I do think that these guys are going to be able to work it out. You've got Ahmad Robinson, who is a nice go-to scorer over at Mercer and New Hampshire in recent years. Last year over at Mercer, 17 points, 5 assists, 5 boards. He just does a little bit of everything, not necessarily a flamethrower three-point shooter, and UAB is probably going to leave a little bit of something to be desired with their three-point shooting, but that said, right now they're shooting 21.1% from three-point range. They are due in for a little bit of positive shooting regression with that regard. Again, I don't think that they're going to be an amazing three-point shooter, but a guy like a Jacob Meyer, who he was last year over at DePaul as a career 36% three-point shooter with about 12.5 points per contest. Chase Westry, he's a former top 75 recruit. Again, this is not a guy that I think is going to go out there and necessarily shoot it well from three, but he's like the lone guy that's making threes right now, 45.5% three-point shooting. He's paying us by 20-plus points per contest, but you're bringing a guy in Kayron Lindsey, who was a top rebounder over at Georgia before he left the program a few seasons ago. Daniel Rivera over at UMass last season, 12 points. Again, not a guy that's going to pop it from three, but 7.5 boards, a steal, a block per contest. And with High Point, they just don't have the size that they've had in past seasons. So I do think that this is going to be a game where UAB looks to win from within, and I think that they bounce back after that bad loss. So I set my line at 2.5. I like UAB on the money line, and I'm going to take a shot on the under as well. 306-645, 306-646. Creighton plays host to Maryland Eastern Shore. The Shore is a 31.5 point underdog. 142.5 to 143.5 is the total, and for the Shore, I set them as a 32.5 point underdog. So you're at 31.5. I'm going to be more to lay with Creighton. Creighton coming off of a brutal loss a few nights ago when they were facing off against Gonzaga. That's it for this Creighton team. I do think that they're going to be able to bounce back, as you've got Nick Graves looking very solid after coming over from Charlotte, averaging 13.5 points per game. For Creighton, they're right now shooting less than 30% from three. I don't think that this is going to be some like 40% three-point shooting team or anything like that, but Josh Dix, he individually over at Iowa last year, 14.5 points, and he did shoot 42% from three-point range. And I love the fact that they brought in multiple guys from Iowa. Owen Freeman last year, who unfortunately had his season cut short due to injury. He was playing that team with 16.5 points, just under 2 blocks, 6.5 rebounds per game. So he's a nice do-it-all sort of player for this unit. They've been having in and out of the lineup Jason Green, so that's something that you do want to note with the backcourt. And for Maryland Eastern Shore, the defense has not been bad, but boy, this team is right there at the bottom of all college basketball in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. I know that Georgia's a pretty solid team, but when you score less than 30 points against Georgia, that's not necessarily a great sign. You've got Joseph Lusardo, who comes over from the country of Australia. He's been able to give the team 10.5 points per contest, so he's been able to do a bit there. And they're really relying upon Dorian Staples, who began his career over at SIU Edwardsville. He last season went down to the non-D1 ranks, had a little bit of success there, and after being just glued to the bench out there in the OVC, he and Christopher Flippin, who gave the team 5 rebounds per game, looked to really team up down low. But I mean, this team just is not the same without Casey Shaw in the backcourt. They have yet to be able to find really that main facilitator, and that's why this offense has just really been stuck in the mud. In their 4 games this far this season, 84 turnovers for Maryland Eastern Shore. They're just not getting good, clean offense going. Their only teams are shooting only 20% from 3. That's going to be going way northward moving forward, and I do think that starts in this game. I did set my total here at a 142.5, so at a 142 or less. Right now I'm seeing a 143.5 out there. I would be willing to take a shot on that 143.5 under, but that's with Creighton. I'm willing to lay up to 32 with them. 306-647, 306-648. You've got Rice. Go Owls, and they're going to be playing us at East Texas A&M. East Texas A&M, an underdog of 11.5 points, 146.5 to 147.5 is the total. So Rice is a 15-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. Was very impressed by Rice's effort earlier in the week when they went to Oregon. They held in there within single digits, and I feel like Rob Lanier is a bit of an underrated coach. Got a raw deal after winning 20 games at SMU. He gets canned because they decided to just put more money into the program and they moved to the ACC, but he brought with him a very key piece in Jalen Smith, played with him over at SMU, and he's been able to give the team 11.5 points per contest. And then Trey Bordeaux, he's in year number 2 of the system after beginning his career over at USC Upstate. He's been very rock solid last year, gave the team 12 points, 5 boards, 4 assists. Not a great 3-point shooter. This year, he's been able to supply 17 points and 3 assists per game in the small sample size that we've seen thus far. And they've got a lot of versatility with their big man. Andrew Akuchi has done a nice job stepping up. He's been seeing more and more minutes with every single passing year. He traditionally was not a guy that shot it from 3. Looks like he might be looking to shoot it a little bit more from distance. He's been able to get the team about 6 points per contest. You bring in Dallas Hobbs, who was a nice guard over at Mount St. Mary's 8 seasons ago. And then Eternity Ajuji, hopefully I said that correct. He's come in as a 6'6", a little bit of a combo guy from the non-D1 ranks. He's able to give you a little bit of 3-point shooting. He's been able to give the team 4 boards, 9 points per contest. So I like what they've got there. And for East Texas A&M, this team was well outside the top 300 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. They were very good at generating turnovers, and Rice did have a little bit of a tough time last year outside the top 275 in terms of their ball security, but you're going to need to get a little bit more out of London Fields. He began his career over at Louisiana, where he saw some okay minutes last season. He's been able to give the team about 7 points per contest, but this team just had absolutely no shooting to speak of whatsoever. And they bring in Ronnie Harrison, who he over at Tarleton St last season in a small sample size of 10 games, 10.5 points, 4 boards. He was able to do a nice job there, but again, wasn't necessarily too much of a 3-point shooter. East Texas A&M, they're once again shooting below 30% from 3-point this year. After last year, they were just not good there. Right now, they're shooting below 68% at the free throw line. I do not think that this is something that's going to be improving just with their overall roster. And then you do lose some of your main big men down low from a year ago as well. So you're relying upon 6'11" Michael Florian to be able to give you some boards after he began his career over at St. Bonaventure along with Eastern Washington. And with the Bonnies last year, just couldn't find a way to be able to get out there on the floor, dealt with a little bit of injury. And I do think that in the end, Rice does find a way to get the job done, even though I do think that it's going to be a sloppier game. East Texas A&M does a nice job of being able to generate turnovers, so made a total of 145. I like the under, and I'm willing to lay it with Rice. 306-649, 306-650. Stone Cold Stephen F. Austin plays us Abilene Christian. Abilene Christian is a 7.5 point underdog. 143.5 is the total, and with the Lumberjacks, I set them as a 3-point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to take the points with Abilene Christian. This is strength on strength. Abilene Christian last year, number 1 in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, and we all know Stone Cold Stephen F. Austin, one of the best teams in all of college basketball in terms of generating turnovers. The offense looks much better for Stephen F. Austin than it did last season. Last year, they were outside the top 340 in terms of points per possession, 3-point shooting percentage, free throw shooting percentage, pretty much everything in terms of offense, but they bring in a big man in Jared Colono, who's not necessarily too much of an offensive force, but multiple blocks per contest over at Northwestern State. Keon Thompson has been magnificent thus far this season, was limited a little bit due to injury in the first 10 games of the season last year. When they got him back, that offense was able to elevate a little bit with 13.5 points per game. Now he's a career 23% three-point shooter. That's currently shooting over 41% from three. That'll regress a little bit, but hey, he's averaging 24 points per contest thus far, and I like the fact that they brought in Cam Burton, who was over at Southeast Louisiana last year. Nice ancillary guy, career 38.5% three-point shooter, 7 points per contest. He fits his Stephen F. Austin style, as Southeast Louisiana was one of the better defensive teams at the mid-major ranks last season, but for Abilene Christian, they themselves have a very tough defense-oriented style. They've lost their top scorer in Keon Williams, who they had to kick off during the offseason late in the process, but Braden Hubbard, he comes back after he gave the team double figures 8 seasons ago. They bring in a guy in Zai Wright, who was at the non-D1 ranks. He's been a good fit with this system. At 6'5", he's able to give a little bit of shiftiness and versatility, and they've got a nice pass-first guy in Rich Smith. Never has been a guy that's necessarily been able to give you a ton of scoring. Last year, 5 points per contest, but a little bit over 3 assists, 2.5 per contest. I like what he brings to the backcourt. It's an Abilene Christian team that they always avoid shooting threes, and bringing in a guy in Joseph Van Zandt, who began his career over at Liberty, I think is a nice coup for them as well. When he was over at Liberty 2 seasons ago, he was giving the team 5.5 points, 6 boards, steal per contest. Nice versatility there. Again, not a three-point shooter, but was limited to just 8 games last season due to injury. Getting him back, I think that this is an Abilene Christian team that gets back to their roots. I think you get a lot of turnovers in this game, so semi-total at a 145, but I do think that those turnovers turn into points. I think that this is close enough for late game following, so give me the points with Abilene Christian, and at a 145 or less with Stephen F. Austin better with their three-point shooting, I'm in on the over. 306-651, 306-652. North Carolina plays with NC Central. NC Central, 35.5 to 36.5 point underdogs. 159.5 to 160.5 is your total, and North Carolina set them as 30.5 point favorites. I'm going to be willing to take the points. With NC Central, it's been a mixed bag of results. They actually did an okay job of being able to give Virginia a little bit of a okay matchup. That said, when they went up against NC State, they just got completely bludgeoned in that game, so it's been a little bit up and down all around for Lavelle Moulton's team, as right now they're averaging about only 65 points per contest. The big thing for them is that they need to find that just primary guard to be able to play off of Deontay Johnson. Johnson is back from a season ago where he was giving the team 6 points, 4 assists per contest. Not a primary scorer, but is a pretty good ball handler. He'll give you a steal or 2 per contest. They bring in Kyrick Davis, who's averaging about 10 points per contest over at West Georgia, but he was not necessarily a primary shooter or anything like that. Corey Carvey, he comes over after at Morehead State last season. He was a nice ancillary piece. He was giving the team 5 points per contest off the bench, but he's a big man. He's not going to give you a lot of three-point shooting. NC Central, after they were outside the top 350, by the way, in terms of their opponent's two-point shooting percentage, they did beef up a little bit more down low. Kalechi Ogagaro, he comes over after he was at Maryland Eastern Shore, along with Austin P. He helps out a little bit in the post as well, and then they bring in Jonathan Dunn from Coppin St to be able to help out as well, but that said, with this North Carolina team, they certainly should be able to win the battle down low, even though they lose in the offseason. Jalen Washington, you've got a guy in Caleb Wilson who at 6'10" is just doing it all, 19.5 points, 8.5 boards, small sample size for the freshman, but he's able to pop a few threes when needed. Henry Vassar at 7 feet tall, he's right now shooting over 40% from three. He was very rock solid over at Arizona last season. Now, they're dealing with the injury to Seth Trimble. Apparently, he got injured on some workout equipment, so that's fun to say the least. So that puts a little bit more of the onus on Kyan Evans, who he was a nice facilitator over at Colorado State, but this is a big step up for him. You do have a lot down low in Jaron Stevenson along Jonathan Boom Boom Powell, but this is going to be a guard system for North Carolina that isn't quite what you'd expect from them. You're probably looking at Jaden Young seeing a few more minutes. Luka Brogvich, who comes on over from Montenegro, he's been able to give you a little bit over 11 points per contest, and I think that North Carolina is going to be able to get the job done easily, but I did set this line more at a 30.5, so I'm going to be willing to take those points with North Carolina, deal with a little bit of injury in the backcourt as well. Semi-total 158.5. NC Central was a top 25 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis last season, so like the under and the points here with NC Central. 306-563, 306-654. You've got Illinois, and they play against Colgate. Colgate is a 28.5 to a 29.5 point underdog. 163.5 is the total. Semi-total 157.5. I like the under. For Colgate last year, they were outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game, and they were uncharacteristically pedestrian from three-point range. It looks like they're going to be a little bit better this season, though Jalen Cox, who only shot about 30% from three-point range last year, he's going to need to be a do-it-all guy, even though he's not necessarily that primary three-point shooter like we've seen in the likes of Jordan Burns, Braden Smith, and company in past years. 15.6 boards, 6 assists here in the first 3 games for Jalen Cox, and he's made the only 3 threes that he's shot thus far this season. I do think that there's going to be a little bit of regression there, but Kyle Carlissimo, that is of relation to PJ Carlissimo, he's been just glued to the bench, whether he be over at Eastern Illinois or Colgate. He's taken some nice strides forward this year as a sixth man. He's been able to give the team a combined 35 points in the first 3 games of the season, and it's been Mr. Wright, Sam Wright, who has stepped up for them, as he last season was a nice ancillary piece, 5.5 points, shot in the mid-30s from 3 at about 6'8". He stepped up in a big way with a little bit over 18 points per contest, so like the direction that Colgate is heading in. Now Illinois is looking to just absolutely run it and gun it. They're dealing with the injury to Tomislav Ivicic. He was missing for that game against Texas Tech, so I would not be surprised if he's missing for this game as well. Why rush him back against Colgate? But that said, you got David Mijkovic, another international man of mystery. He's been able to give the team 16 plus points, 7 plus rebounds per game. Is 6'9", do-it-all sort of combo player. Ben Humericus, who began his career over at Evansville, he's been able to give the team double figures. And Kylan Boswell, who's always been a nice ancillary guard. He's been able to distribute the ball, what have you. He's really taken on the scoring load. 21 points per contest to begin the season. Andrei Stojakovic, who was a very good scorer a season ago over at Cal. Not necessarily the greatest three-point shooter, but was able to give that team 18 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. He's been stepping up with 16 points per game as well for Colgate. They're going to have a tough time being able to match up with the size, even with Tomislav Ivicic dealing with injury, because you've got his brother, Big Z, who stands 7 feet tall. He's able to give you multiple blocks per contest, so that takes it out of you a little bit. But that said, I do think that the Colgate backcourt is going to be able to do just enough to be able to hold in there, and I do think that Colgate is going to try to slow things down a little bit more. I think that they have some success with the way that they take care of the ball. So set my line at 25.5, like the points with Colgate, and I set my total at 157.5. I like the under, and wrap things up with a neutral court game from Hawaii. The random college basketball game in Hawaii through a 6-6-55 through a 6-6-56. You've got Utah Tech against Mississippi Valley State. The Delta Devils are an underdog of 24.5 points. So on this game, it is 146.5, and with Utah Tech, I made them a 29.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay it. Yay, verily, to the fact that Mississippi Valley State covered north of 40 in their game against Hawaii a few nights ago, but this team last year was dead last in the country in terms of both points scored and points allowed on a per possession basis, and now they've got more potential to be blown out. After last year, they were outside the top 280 in terms of total possessions per game. They've really sped themselves up this year. They're up to about 51st in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and still not getting a lot going on offense. Third worst in terms of points scored on a per possession basis this year. Now, if we are wanting to give our good friends over at Mississippi Valley State a little bit of a compliment, how about what Michael James has been able to do? 24.5 points, 5.5 boards, 2.5 assists. He's actually been very good to start the season, but there's really not much around him. Antonio Sisk is one of the few holdovers from a season ago. He has not been able to blossom. You don't have a lot down low. Daniel Mayfield has been able to give you about 7 rebounds per game, but his team is getting plowed on the glass. They are turning the ball over 21 times per contest. And Utah Tech, when they were really in their heyday at the Division II level, a team that played high octane. They were able to generate some turnovers, really bomb it from 3. They're not as good of a 3-point shooting team this season, but they're much better down low. Ethan Potter, who began his career over at Utah Valley, he's been able to give the team 7.5 boards, 16.5 points per contest. I do think that the 3-point shooting should be able to go upward a little bit. Nathan Bolonga, who he began his career over at St. Bonaventure, he last season didn't see a lot of minutes. He's been able to get the team double figures, has shot less than 30% from 3. Think that should go northward. And Jashawn Holt, a former top 100 recruit of Alabama and Georgia, he's been able to come in and he's been able to give you some nice scoring off the bench, as he's been able to give you 9 points per contest. Actually, he's been utilized as a starter, but 5 boards. He's shooting about 44% from 3-point range as a 6'6", a little bit of a combo player, so he's elevating this team. A Utah Tech team that was well outside the top 320 in terms of rebound percentage last year has been much more respectable. They're pulling in their darn near 14 offensive rebounds per game. Had a little bit of rough go against Manhattan, but I just think that Manhattan's a solid team, and with Samuel Uribe coming in, and he's been able to give this team quite a bit of production over the last few years after beginning his career over at Washington. I do think that this is a Utah Tech team that takes it to Mississippi Valley State, and with that up-tempo style, I do think that you get a little bit more scoring in this game. Set my total at 151.5. I like the over, and I'm going to be willing to lay up to 29 here with Utah Tech, and that'll wrap things up for the Friday edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. A big thanks to our good friend Shaggy Betts in Mr. Nate Hornung. He joined me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter /X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, large DM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. it from there. You're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, and I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast with picks and analysis on every single game, every single day, so I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.